Hello everyone and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, August 23rd, and I hope y'all are having an amazing day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're bringing you some great content with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'll start with our Techstrong news recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines from around the world. Then, Alan sits down with Karanjot Jaswal, co-founder and CTO of Cinchi. Alan and Karanjot will talk about how Cinchi helps organizations gain simplified, streamlined, and authorized access to data by allowing data to become autonomous. Next, Alan speaks with Mike Waz, founder and CEO of Datometry. In this interview, Mike explains how Datometry has developed a solution to solve migration issues by allowing existing applications to run on any modern cloud platform without being rewritten or replaced. We then go to RSA, where Alan spoke with Mike Beck, CISO of Darktrace, where they discussed what Darktrace does as a security vendor and the evolution of computing power and data analysis. Then we are re-airing one of our favorite episodes of DevOps Unbound, where Mitch Ashley is joined by Tammy Bateau of Statype and Paul Bruce of Tricentis to discuss the principles and best practices of chaos engineering and how to effectively implement chaos testing to ensure resiliency. We are following that up with an episode of View with Vizard. In this interview, Mike interviews Matt Ulrey, Chief Product Officer for Arculix by SecureAuth, where he explains how passwordless technology developed by the FIDO Alliance will be applied to secure infrastructure. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us about some of the upcoming webinars. Then we go to Brendan O'Leary for the 16th episode of The Lab with Brendan O'Leary, where he will tell us about this month's milestone GitLab release. We then go to KubeCon Cloud Native Con, where Mitch met with Ted Young, Head of Developer Education at Lightstep. In this interview, Mitch and Ted will talk about OpenTelemetry and announce availability of OpenTelemetry metrics. And finally, we wrap up with 2 more episodes of View with Vizard. Mike first speaks with Renuka Nadkarni, Chief Product Officer of Aryaka, where Renuka explains how remote access security is evolving in the Managed Secure Access Service Edge era. Then, Mike speaks with Catherine McGarvey and Chris Clark from the Cloud Foundry Foundation, where they talk about how an open source platform as a service environment running on top of Kubernetes will provide a much needed boost to cloud native application developer productivity while also streamlining DevOps workflows. And that's what we have coming for you in this episode of Techstrong TV. Let's get the show started. Enjoy.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for August 23rd. First up, a blockchain analysis firm released a report stating that $1.9 billion worth of cryptocurrency was stolen in the past 7 months. Much of this stolen cryptocurrency is due to the increase in hacks on decentralized finance, or DeFi protocols. DeFi transactions have increased in popularity over the past couple of years, but they are vulnerable to hacking as they are relatively immature. There seems to be no signs of stopping of this crypto theft, though, despite the recent drop in value of cryptocurrencies. Next, the British government announced that human drivers won't be liable for accidents when a vehicle is self-driving. Instead, the manufacturers operating self-driving vehicles will be held liable, according to the country's new roadmap to achieve widespread rollout of self-driving cars by 2025. This could set a global precedent, though, as liability of self-driving vehicles are still a gray area. In addition, the UK is also investing $30 million into the emerging AV market to gain the full benefits that the autonomous vehicle technology provides. Next in the news, DoorDash has announced that it is ending its partnership with Walmart in September. The two companies first partnered up in 2018 when Walmart started using DoorDash to deliver its groceries to the customers. This end of the partnership, though, isn't surprising, as Walmart has been slowly working on rolling out its own delivery service platform, Spark, which now accounts for 75% of its deliveries. And while DoorDash has ended its partnership with Walmart, it has announced several high-profile partnerships with other companies, including one with Facebook for delivering items from the Facebook marketplace. In other news, Hawaii has implemented a new state law stating that a sacred mountain of the native Hawaiians, Mauna Kea, must be protected for future generations. and that science must be balanced with culture and the environment. This marks a shift in policy, as for the past 50 years, the astronomers have controlled the summit. Native Hawaiians want to preserve that site and other sacred sites, but business and political leaders desire astronomy to support jobs in Hawaii's tourist-heavy economy. This will be an interesting case study to whether or not astronomers and Native Hawaiian people can work together to study science responsibly from a culturally significant land. Next up in the news, major automobile makers have announced that they will begin replacing gas-powered muscle cars with those that run on batteries instead. Stellantis' Dodge brand said it will stop making gasoline versions of the Dodge Challenger and the Dodge Charger muscle cars by the end of next year, and that the factories that make them will transition to making all-electric cars. General Motors has also recently said it plans to build an all-electric Chevrolet Corvette. The reasons that are being stated for this shift are due to electric cars being faster off the starting line, having better handling, as well as stricter government pollution requirements. However, it will take a few years for these gas-powered cars to go away completely. On Digital CXO, we have an episode of Digital CXO Insight Leadership, where Mike Vizard talks to Brendan Howe, Vice President and General Manager for Blockchain at VMware, and Alim Karim, Director of Product Management for VMware, about why decentralized applications require an enterprise-grade blockchain platform. On Security Boulevard, we have an article discussing the ransomware task force release of the blueprint for ransomware defense. The blueprint consists of a set of 40 actionable and achievable safeguards to guard themselves against ransomware. These recommendations are meant to help small and medium-sized businesses, as approximately 43% of cyber attacks target these businesses. And finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article looking at a survey of over 200 DevOps and IT information security professionals, showing a steady DevSecOps progression. Mesmo recently released a study showing that 62% of the respondents are actively evaluating use cases for DevSecOps. The survey also took a look at what the challenges that organizations face when it comes to implementing DevSecOps. To learn more about the findings, go to DevOps.com. And that's what we have for today in Techstrong's News Recap.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. We've got a first-time guest, new company to introduce you to here to our Techstrong audience. Let me introduce you to Karen Jawal. I hope I didn't mispronounce it. Karen is how we're going to refer to him here. Karen, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Just so we, for the record, have your name straight, was that close, or you could say it?
I can say it. It's Karanjot Jaswal.
Karanjot Jaswal. Very cool. All right. Name of the company. Well, I didn't even say the name of the company. Why don't you do it, Karen?
Sure. So the company is Cinchi. Cinchi is leading the next tech revolution to help organizations gain simplified, streamlined, and authorized access to data. So Cinchi provides the world's first comprehensive data-aware platform that unlocks data from enterprise apps and connects it together in a universal data network. And that's really what we're all about. So I'm the co-founder and I'm the CTO at Cinchi.
CTO. Fantastic. You know what? Give us a little bit of your personal story, if you don't mind, how you came to co-found Cinchi.
Sure. Yeah. So my background was always in technology. So by education, I have a degree in computer engineering, but post that, I actually went into working for large enterprise organizations, primarily financial institutions, delivering technology solutions in that space, managing the delivery of complex transformational initiatives. And really, being in that situation, I saw firsthand the challenges associated with data integration. Managing budgets in that environment, I noticed that essentially half of my IT change budget, or upwards of half of my IT change budget, was actually being consumed by trying to gain access to data that already existed in the organization, to be able to understand what's out there, to bring that information together to actually deliver a net new capability for the business. And that was incredibly frustrating. You take a $10 million project and you're spending more than $5 million in just trying to get at existing data. And that is what we set out to change, because that paradigm hasn't fundamentally changed for the past 40 years in how people have delivered technology solutions. They've always had to integrate data. And at Cinchi, it's our mission to change that equation completely. So what we're trying to do, what we want to do is make data integration irrelevant. And in that process, slash operating costs, eliminate new data silos, enable better collaboration, and make it easier for companies to deliver the digital solutions that are needed for modern operations. So these advances, in turn, for these organizations unleash a wave of benefits to the business at large. So faster time to market with new products to enhancing the competitive edge in the marketplace.
Love it. You know, Karan, I really feel, maybe I just realized it during COVID more than I did before, but we've had a renaissance of emphasis on the data. It's almost like someone put the signs up all over that says it's all about the data, stupid. You know, for a long time we were so hung up on infrastructure and application and you know, all of the different pieces of delivery, cloud gateways, all the different pieces of the modern computing stack of how technology works in our daily lives. And for whatever reason, we lost the emphasis on it's about that data. All of this other stuff is about collecting, analyzing, delivering data, right? It's meaningless without the data. So we have had a resurgence of data, and we've seen, you know what, the cloud brought a exponentially cheaper data storage paradigm to market. But as often happens in technology, right? Oh, you made it cheaper? Good. Well, I'll just store a lot more then, right? So that you know, kind of advantage, if you will, was quickly I remember when Microsoft Windows came on, just like 5 3x5 or the bigger 5-inch floppies, and then all of a sudden, boom, CDs came out, and it took, you know, friggin' 6 gigabytes on a CD or a DVD, whatever. Same thing happened with cloud storage and data. All of a sudden, oh, you could store more data. Great, I got lots of data to store, and we started storing more and more. Now, and it almost seems like we have an insatiable appetite for data. And you're right. For many of us, right, data is inextricably linked to what application we collected it in, or, you know, where we're going to use it. Yeah. Kind of separating out the data from, you know, the app and so forth would seem like a no-brainer. Why do you think it hasn't been done till now?
Honestly, I think a big part of when you look at the evolution of data and this technology stack, as you described, to a certain extent, it's kind of inevitable that things have played out the way that they have. Because if you go back in time and look at when systems originally became distributed, post that point, now each system that you are standing up has its own data silo. And when you have a small number of them, it doesn't seem like a massive issue that, oh, my data is siloed all over the place. And I need some mechanism to be able to bridge that gap. And so then you have the introduction of technologies that enable you to connect this information together. So integration tech. And now you look at this stack that's continuing to become more and more complex, where you have more solutions, more capabilities that have been delivered inside of an organization. And what is the next problem that you have? Well, I need to be able to derive insights. I need to be able to report on this data. So I need a solution that brings all this information together in order to enable that capability. And now my data volume is continuing to grow. I need a mechanism to be able to do that in a more agile manner. And so you have solutions like data lakes that come along. And so without going through the entire sort of history of it, it is logical when you look at what is the next best action. But if you take a step back and you revisit the sort of macro picture in its entirety, what you see is that there's a massive opportunity to disrupt how information is managed and how we think about it as a whole. And in that opportunity, you can drive a lot of efficiency for the organization. And that's really the approach that Sinchi's adopted. And you're absolutely right that there has been this massive shift to giving that data a lot more importance. And that's been increasingly the case over the past 10, 15 years, and perhaps even longer. And it's continuing in that direction to be more and more so the case. So it's critically important that we think about this information not in the context of what is the particular business solution that it is driving, because that tight coupling should not exist. An application needs to be thought more so as an experience around that data. It's a means of interacting with that in an efficient way. It's not the only way to get at my data. Whereas today, that is very much the setup is if I want to use my information, I'm constrained by what the application allows me to do and what its experiences enable me to do. But by decoupling that, now what you enable is not only the reusability across many different solutions that the business is putting in place, but you also now allow different solutions to collaborate on that data, to contribute to this network of information that you've stood up to power your organization and obviously consume from as well, and to drive different experiences. It gives you a lot more fungibility, a lot more flexibility in how you think about these outcomes, and as well as even simple things like vendor lock-in, which I say it's simple, but it's not necessarily simple from an organization's perspective. And so it goes a long way to helping with these massive issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you, just to bring it home to our audience, here at Techstrong, for instance, right? Look, our community list, right? The people who've registered for events and newsletters and who come to our webinars or watch Techstrong TV, whatever, that's the lifeblood. That's the data. That's the lifeblood of our company. And we store it in one of these marketing / sales kind of providers. And what we're constantly constrained with is that all that data is, as long as you're using something that company provides, I have access to it all. When I want to grab that data to use in something that's not related to that company, quite frankly, it's a giant pain in the butt. Right? Because you got to literally export the data into a spreadsheet or, then put it on something, duplicating the data. So now I have twice as much storage of it. And it's just inefficient. Doesn't even begin to describe it. So, I mean, the idea of just having this data lake, if you will, or, data that I could use on a variety of applications, not locked in, is very appealing. Let's get into kind of the guts of Sinchi. Karan, tell us, so how does it work? What does it do exactly? How's it packaged?
Yeah, so in terms of how the overall solution is architected, effectively what the platform is enabling you to do is create data in what we call an autonomous fashion. And so think of an autonomous data set, this concept of an autonomous data set, as being one that you are able to define in let's say you define a data structure, a table. It has rows, it has columns of information. It is independent of any one business solution that is planning on leveraging that. So you're aligning the structure, the way you're modeling this data in a manner that is conducive to the business. It's how the business thinks about that information. If we take a simple example of I have an employee data set, right? This employee data set, what are the attributes of an employee? Well, what are the attributes my organization cares about in terms of all of the information that is relevant to them for that employee? Now, that in turn has an owner associated with it that is accountable for managing that structure. And they are also in control of the permissions of who can interact with this data in what capacity. So they can drive who can view it, who can change it down to an individual cell level. by defining policies that are driven off of the information that's inside of that data set, as well as information elsewhere inside of the environment. So basically, you have this node. Think of it as a node inside of a network, which is a data set that is protected by controls and has ownership over it. It belongs to a larger domain of interconnected data sets of this sort. And these domains, in turn, can connect to one another. So the environment now provides that capability of being able to model and define and control and protect data in a manner that is democratized, where many different teams can work in a completely federated way, where they're building out this network of information and it's evolving organically with protections that allow that evolution to take place without necessarily impacting the work that one team is doing, where they've created a dependency on another. And so that's the core of what it is that we do, is give you a platform to be able to do that. Now, layered on top of it is capabilities to be able to bridge the gap between your legacy world, the existing way you manage information today, and Sinchi. So bidirectional connectivity to freely flow information in and out. The next capability around that is a suite of data services to be able to interact with that information now, to enable you to now build additional capabilities on top of it, along with a component that we call the data browser. Think of that conceptually as the user experience that's kind of like your web browser. And that is now for you to be able to explore, access, view, change information inside of this entire environment, subject to your level of access. So me logging into an environment, everything that I have access to inside of this network, I can experience it through that data browser. And this entire package, all of these capabilities in its entirety, forms a platform that falls into the category of dataware, which is how Sinchi is positioned. It is a dataware platform. And that's ultimately what it's doing. You think of it as the reason why we use dataware is hardware, software, dataware. So it's bridging that gap.
Got it. Now, I mean, obviously, since she's a commercial company that makes money, how do you charge for this?
So the way the product is licensed is by what we call builders. So there's a platform fee, and then on top of that is builders. And the reason why we price in this way, so firstly, a builder is a resource that is creating solutions inside of this environment. So perhaps they're owners of information inside of the environment. They're designing that model. They're creating services and capabilities on top of it. And the rationale for pricing in this way is really we're providing these individuals, these builder resources, with a superpower to be able to accelerate and deliver solutions for their business in a manner that they've not been able to in the past, where they can reuse existing data assets. You can provide access instead of copies of information. You have all of these services and capabilities layered on top of it. And so that's the structure. And in terms of where the platform runs, so our clients, it's very important to us actually that we give everyone control over their information. That's a big part of what it is that our organization does. And the elimination of integration is a core component in restoring control over information, where you don't have copies of your data everywhere. So in the spirit of that, what we do is we allow you to actually host the technology wherever you choose. You can choose your cloud provider. You can choose to run it on-prem, completely up to you. The way the platform is packaged, it runs on Kubernetes, and you have the flexibility of now choosing which flavor of that.
Love it. Excellent. You know what? We didn't tell people the website. I'm going to assume it's Sinchi something, but Karan, help us.
Yeah, so it's Sinchi.com. So certainly there's a lot more resources available on Sinchi.com, which go much deeper. We also have a website, Sinchi.tv. think of that as our own YouTube, which has lots of videos touching from topics on getting started to actually going much deeper and demonstrating various capabilities. So for the audience, please do check those out. And certainly there's a number of different ways of contacting us through those as well.
And just so, people are watching video here, they see the name Cinchy in your background. But for those who may be just listening, it's CINCHY.com. Correct.
Yeah. And if you have any trouble remembering that, it is a play on the word cinch, making things simple.
Got it. Hey, man, thank you so much for coming on and giving us the Cinchy story today, Karan. Best of luck. We forgot to mention, Cinchy was also named a Gartner Cool Vendor, right? And for those who follow that kind of thing, congratulations on that. Come back, keep us posted on what's going on and developments here, okay?
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
All right. Check it out, Cinchy.com here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to another Techstrong TV segment here. I've got a first-time company that we have not highlighted before. I want to introduce you, and a first-time guest, I should mention. I want to introduce you to Mike Wass. Mike is with a company called Datometry. He's going to spell it for us and give us the URL. Hey, Mike, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hi, Alan. Great to be here.
Thanks. Nice to have you. So, if you don't mind, let's get that out of the way first. Datometry, how do you spell it? And where do people go on the web to find the company?
Datometry, Datometry. And our URL is datometry.com.
Excellent. All right. Mike, why don't we start with, if you don't mind, let's give people a little bit of, the Mike Wass story. And then a little bit of the Datometry story.
Absolutely. So I'm a database geek. I've been working in databases for the last 30 years, first in academia, then with major database vendors. And for the last almost 10 years, I've been doing Datometry. And one thing that, while working on databases, working on the vendor side, was kind of becoming obvious to me was, it doesn't matter whether you have the better, faster, or cheaper database. The biggest problem for people to move between databases is that they build all these applications on top of their database. And it's just incredibly difficult / impossible to move these applications. And so over time, major enterprises end up with this large database fleet of all sorts of databases that they adopted over the years, never get to consolidate, and never really get to move on. And so the Datometry story is really kind of born out of that experience, both as a vendor, but also on the customer side, where I was looking at moving an enterprise out of a database commitment that they've made for a couple of decades, and we were unable. And so with Datometry, the idea here is, what if we introduce an abstraction between the application and the database that sits in between, and that acts as a real-time translator, so that your application, speaking whatever language it speaks, what it was originally developed for, can now talk to pretty much any other database. You wouldn't have to migrate, you wouldn't have to rewrite your code, you wouldn't have to reinvent the business. Just take your application, slap Datometry under it, and now you can run on, for example, a modern cloud database. That's really the idea behind Datometry.
I love it. Mike, back in the .com days, I worked for what we called an ASP. I helped put together an ASP. We wound up going public and everything, application service provider. And we had a whole fleet of applications that we were offering in a hosted environment. This is before there was a cloud, right? And all of ubiquitous bandwidth and all of that. But the interesting thing is we had a common problem there that even back then, people wanted their, library of applications to give you an idea of how old it is. We're talking PeopleSoft and Onyx and some of the Oracle things and Lawson and Lotus Notes. But anyway, people wanted a common data set that ran across all, or not that ran across, that all these applications ran on top of, right? So that I didn't need a separate database for each application, and that, we could, because then you could look at, the data sets across, not just per application. And we were always in search of what we called the miracle layer, that somehow was going to abstract the database, right? Abstract the data from the database, but would plug in. We didn't have APIs back then like they do now even, but that somehow we were going to write connectors to the individual applications that would allow it to pull from an external data source, which many of these applications back then were not set up for. Right? Oracle apps didn't work without Oracle database, obviously. We never did it, by the way. .com boom bust came when they went bankrupt, everything else. So are you saying you've now solved this problem?
We solved the problem, but with a different technology. And in a subtle technology, in the sense that in the past, a lot of folks looked at this saying, hey, can we just unify all databases so that at the application level, I see one database, and then all I need is one universal database programming language, and I can rule them all. And that's the idea of data virtualization. It's been around for a long time, but as you know, it's never really caught on that much. And the problem with that is that you first have to migrate all of your applications to use that universal language. But also you're pulling so much functionality out of the database that you're basically building a separate database in the middle. And these things just never really seem to have commercially worked out. And what we do is kind of somewhat similar, yet very different in that we don't pull functionality out of the database. We let your application come as it is, speak to any of these databases as if it was its native database that it was originally written for. And so you can take let's say a Teradata application and put it on Azure Synapse or on Google BigQuery, and you can just speak with the same language that it had before, and you wouldn't have to change the application. You don't need to be aware of that. And to kind of give you an idea of just how seamless this can work, we recently had a major logistics company re-platform their workloads off of their on-premises data warehouse. One of the most complex ones in all of EMEA, I'm told, moved that to a cloud-native database. And our champion there was, during the implementation, so impressed by how seamless this works that he decided not to tell his users when he cuts them over. Now, keep in mind, this is a mission-critical system. This is open heart surgery. And he cut over 5,000 users on a weekend from one database into a cloud database without telling them. And nobody knew. No accidents. Wow. They're like, all right.
Can you imagine?
IT operations usually are never smooth, but re-platforming a database without telling anybody, that's kind of a whole new league.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, people would lose their job for that. But that's great. So where's the magic then? How does this get done?
I think there are a couple of things
that you can tell us. We're good.
Well, first off, it is engineering. It's hard engineering. And when you think about the work that we needed to do was really around implementing several surfaces of databases. And that's just a really huge amount of work that needs to be done. And a lot of people, when I started out with Datometry, said, it's probably going to take about 20 years, huh? Do you think? And back then we're like, well, we think we can do it in 5. First off, you need the right team. And I'm super proud, honored, and humbled to have assembled a team of experts who have that necessary, not only skill set and talent, but also that conviction to make that happen. But then also really understanding what's the architecture that we need for this. This is something that is a bit akin to a query optimizer, ultimately. And that's kind of generally considered one of the most complex components of a database. And so we've taken a lot of database research from that space and brought that into our product. And lastly, we've also used kind of technology that we knew will allow us to be much more productive in this space. So we're using what is kind of carrier grade a platform called Erlang OTP that was really written for taking packets off the network, doing something to them, and putting them back on. And that's really the sweet spot of that language. Very, very popular in telcos, in telecommunication. And that just happens to be the sweet spot for us as well. And so that has been an enormous productivity boost for us. Had we done this in kind of conventional technology, I think it would have taken a number of years more. But it really is coming down to tough engineering and research.
Excellent. So it sounds like I don't want to say the use case, but the driver for people looking at datametry is, as they're moving from an on-prem sort of database solution to a cloud-based solution, it's also a good time usually to change. Not a good time. There's never a good time, perhaps. But it's also a time where people look to change the database that they're on. So it's more than just running Oracle here and Oracle there, or NoSQL here and there. It's really changing, databases. And you might as well do it when you're changing location as well.
Exactly.
So now, of course, in real life, there's fewer greenfields than there are brownfields, and people don't just migrate from on-prem to cloud in one fell swoop. There's a migration, and that migration can take months, years even. How does the solution work there?
Yeah, we really, if you will, disrupt that whole notion of you need 5 years or even 10 years to move your critical data assets. We've been able to pull some of really complex data warehouses into cloud databases within 3 quarters, within less than 10 months. And that by itself is, if you will, a record. But it goes much further, and that is, we are not really a migration tool. Granted, the migration use case is a very obvious one, and is one where the entire industry is clamoring right now, because everybody is pushing to cloud. Everybody is eager to replace their kind of conventional databases with platform native databases that are deeply integrated into the cloud infrastructure. But think about it, we're really kind of this abstraction that makes a lot of other things now happen. We're almost like a Swiss Army knife of database connectivity. And the next step here is every major enterprise today, as I mentioned at the beginning, has a lot of different databases. And recently I asked an IT leader at a major investment bank here in the US, how many databases do you have right now? How many database types? And very quickly they came up with about kind of ballparking it at about 150. And then I asked them, so how many do you really think you need? And they couldn't really enumerate more than about 8. All the other stuff are databases that they effectively picked up at some point in time, but couldn't shed. And there was never enough time and money to shed these, because there are applications running on them and they're perfectly fine, never change a winning team. And so they ended up with this massive database fleet. But the next kind of step here in the datametry story is really about consolidation. The classic virtualization benefit, if you will, that, you can put 10, 20 of these different application stacks now back onto just one database or onto 5 databases, but you don't need 150. And so that's kind of really the next step here. And it's the same technology. That's the beauty about it. It's not like we're building something new for this. It's the same technology that enables that. And then one level up after that in the journey is what you mentioned at the beginning. You want your applications to access data in different databases, and you don't want to shovel the data back and forth. And so with our technology, you make that also happen, because now your application can pull data from database 1, from 2, from 3, and so on and so forth, completely seamlessly. And so there's a really large journey that enterprises are currently embarking on. Migration is really just the starting point for us. The classic virtualization benefits of consolidation and optimization and just really streamlining IT is what we're gunning for in the next chapter here.
Excellent. This is, having sitting where I sit, right, Mike, I have a unique view of the market. And I often say to people when they find out about a company, about the time, say the name for me again, I don't mess it up, Datometry. Yep. People say, wow, where did this company come from? This is great. What a great solution. It's like, and it's like, yeah, it's another one of those 10-year overnight successes, right? People don't realize as a founder, you put your blood, sweat, and tears and you build something, and it takes, a lot of things don't get built in 3 months or 6 months or even a year. It takes time to build a company. It takes time to build solutions, and it takes time to build a market. But one day, it's like you burst on the scene. Right? And people are like, oh my God, where'd this come from? But it sounds like, that's kind of your story here. You guys have been at it and you've perfected it. And congratulations to you and the whole team.
No, thank you so much.
Great.
And there's really one interesting point in there just to highlight this, and that is that whole idea about making databases interchangeable and the abstraction of the database, as you said before, that's been in people's minds for a long time. As long as there have been databases, because it's been one of the problems that databases always had. But what really made that possible is kind of where the market moved in the last couple of years, and that is that push to the cloud. That's been kind of an external forcing function for really everybody to say, hey, we need to reevaluate whether we should stay on that database or not. And that has kind of really created an earthquake across the industry that really has shaken up everybody. And had it not been for that, I think it would have been much tougher to kind of break into the market. But that's kind of an external enabler, if you will.
Agreed, Matt. Hey, before we go, one last time, give them the website. Datometry.com. Absolutely. Check it out. Mike, thanks for coming on Techstrong TV and keeping us posted on this. It sounds great. We look forward to hearing more from you.
Thanks, Alan, for having me.
All righty. Datometry.com. Mike Watts here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back here in a moment on Techstrong.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here live at RSA conference. It's our last day of RSA coverage. Well, it's also the last day of RSA conference, so it's a good thing that it's our last day of coverage. There wouldn't be much to cover tomorrow. Continuing interviewing some really interesting folks and companies here at RSA. I want to introduce you to Mike Beck. Mike is with Darktrace, and hey, Mike, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you on here. So, Mike, well, I'm going to bet a lot of people here don't know Darktrace. A lot of people here at the show, as well as a lot of people watching us live right now. So, I guess we should need to start there. What's Darktrace about, and maybe a little bit about you?
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. So Darktrace is 9 years old now. We were born out of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And we've always done machine learning and AI. So that's always been what we've done. We have a product suite that is looking across the entire range of digital data. So email, SaaS, cloud workload, network, endpoint. And we're elevating out interesting behavioral elements for defenders to go and take action or to use our autonomous response and have the AI neutralize something as it starts to develop. So that's what we've been doing. We've been talking a lot with our contacts here and talking about where Darktrace is heading into the future. We're doing a lot more in the prevent space for us. So we've got new technology coming out in the next few months that's going to focus around risk. which, I'm a CISO, I protect Darktrace as well. So I have the pressures of every other CISO.
Like everyone else does, exactly.
In understanding that operational risk and being able to report that upwards. So a lot of what we've been doing is actually not just waiting for the attack to take place, but how do we start to look at technology that can help us understand how the attack might happen to us, so that as CISOs, we can start to take action earlier.
You brought up something, and I want to emphasize that for the audience. Just because you're a security vendor, as a matter of fact, because you're a security vendor, you're more of a target, perhaps, than companies, other companies, other kinds of companies. And so even security vendors, especially security vendors, need CISOs. And so it's important we have that. But now, let's talk a little bit about what Darktrace does. We were talking off camera. In the 25 plus years I'm in security, a bit of a holy grail has been we could detect attacks without an agent, without this, just by the behaviors that we see, heuristics and all of these things. The landscape is littered with companies who said they could do it 20 years ago. There's been a few successful ones, but really, you can't make wine before it's time, right? And we didn't have the technology 20 years ago, 15 years ago that we have today. We didn't have the ability to really kind of, like the whole big data thing, right? Whether you want to call it ML, AI, or what have you, right? We didn't have the ability to really wrap our heads around massive amounts of data and do the analysis to see the patterns, to see the anomalies, if you will, right? That can clue us in to something's, not right here. I've mentioned a few of the things. What are also the other kind of big triggers that have allowed Darktrace to be successful where other companies frankly haven't been?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple of elements there, right? I think as data science has come an incredible way in the last few years.
Yes, it has.
Compute power has come an incredible way, over 10 years. What we can do now, particularly with inside cloud workloads and getting the compute power we need to crunch the data. So that's kind of shaped the environment. I think the stream of talent that underpins that, I know inside Darktrace, the effort that we go to get the right data engineers, the right scientists coming into the mix. That's an important part of the puzzle. And then I think, if I look at the kind of success of Darktrace, where we were when we first started this 9 years ago, utilizing machine learning and AI just wasn't really part of the security mindset. Like, it wasn't believable that was something that you should bring into your stack. I think roll forward, 9-10 years to where we are today, AI is all around us. It has to be. I think we all know that as human beings, as defenders in the security context, there's too much data, there's too much complexity. And how do we get to a place where we can help understand what's happening in those environments across those different structures that we're utilizing? We have to be in a place where we can partner with AI. And I think, what does Darktrace comes at it from a philosophy of partnering. AI is not going to take any jobs, right? It's there to do what it's good at, which is complexity and data crunching and elevating out of that some sense that our defenders can use to overlay their domain knowledge. And that partnership is where you get a good kind of security from.
So I'll tell you, I don't want to go all philosophical on you, but I think part of this whole, wrapping your head around this whole concept is tied into what you believe the ultimate fate of the universe is, right? Because, one of the things we've seen in security and in technology, as well as in the universe itself, is that as time goes on, the complexity increases, right? Because you have more data and more nodes and more things going on and more stuff. So it gets more and more complex. And as a result, you need more and more complexity, more and more AI, more and more magic, right? To wrap your head around that. Now, there's another school of thought that, physical laws kick in, and then, it gets complex, but it becomes so complex that it almost collapses on itself, right? And then becomes, you get down to your basic the four basic laws of physics, right? And that, by and taking it to this analogy, utilizing the technologies like AI, and our AI gets better, and our ability to handle bigger data, graphs and so forth get better, we actually can simplify and become elementary about recognizing these kinds of things. So what school of thought are you in?
Love these questions. I think I'm in the first camp. I think, when we look at the transformation that we're seeing today, if you look at the kind of new technologies that are available, I think, even if we take kind of a different domain like fintech, right? I think, there's a changing shape to how we want to conduct transactions and interact in financial systems and the new technology, blockchain technology that kind of wraps around that. You can't walk around, kind of major cities now without seeing kind of crypto advertising kind of all around you. And I think that's a really interesting space that it's heading. I think you're going to see, again, with compute power, there's still so much possibility of where digital transactions take shape. We hear about the metaverse all the time. We don't quite understand it yet, where that's going to take us.
True.
But I think, technologies that help us understand what's happening in amongst that, and a construct that we use a lot in Darktrace is explainable AI, right? How do we kind of understand and not black box it in a way that, we can make sure end users understand what the AI is picking up on and why it's picking up on it. So I think when you augment those technologies, you get to a space where you have to be using AI to help understand what's happening there, because I do think, my opinion is that
it just keeps going.
Going to keep going.
All right, cool enough. Let's talk a little bit about RSA and Darktrace.
Please.
What's been your experience this week?
I'm sure you've had this from everybody, right? I think everybody's just the energy, the buzz
to be in person,
just to be in person again. And I know, we were thinking about, are people going to come? Is it going to be the same? Gartner's taking place at the same time. So what's the split? This is huge. This is off the scale that,
Well, it's off the COVID scale.
Yeah, it is.
But you also got to remember, this is half of what it was.
True.
2019 and even 2020.
True. But I think just to feel the buzz again is
to have this many
sense.
people talking security, thinking security, being around it is. How's the reception been for Darktrace from these folks?
It's great. I think, we hosted a big dinner on Tuesday with our customers. It's always nice to kind of meet, when all of your customers are in one space, like why not kind of bring them in? So it's great to sit down with people and kind of talk about how they're utilizing the technology. We've been kind of showcasing our prevent technology and going into the risk side. And that was kind of a huge part that we wanted to kind of talk to people about. And it's been really well received. I can feel in the conference as well, and in some of the talks, a lot of people are feeling like the, cyber insurance premiums are going up. I was in a talk on Tuesday and somebody mentioned, insurance and the whole room like just groaned, right? Like everybody.
I just had someone from a cyber insurance company here.
Yeah, it's and so when we think about building our controls in our environments, when we think about using our experience as CISOs, latching on to kind of incidents as they occur, how do we kind of move to the left again and bring about an understanding to the CISO is how do we mature the controls without trying to get into incident response. So I think that's been really interesting.
Cool. Hey, man, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I think we had a good discussion on stuff. You know what? We didn't mention websites. How can people get more information on Darktrace?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Darktrace.com.
Easy enough.
And yeah, go there and you'll pick up on our technology and how to contact us. So yeah, please.
Excellent, man. Check it out, darktrace.com. It's a technology whose time has come. We're going to take a break here at RSA. We're getting close to lunch. But I think we have another interview or two maybe before we break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Well, welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. We're talking about chaos engineering, very hot topic. And we've got a couple of experts here on our panel today. Let me first start by reminding you that DevOps Unbound is a twice monthly recorded on Techstrong TV. You can check us out and watch us there. We're also, past episodes are also available on DevOpsUnbound.com. And we also do a live roundtable once a month in a webinar format. But it's similar to this, but the audience can participate with us in a very engaging way. So we love that you're here either on a pre-record or with us live on roundtable events. And of course, we'd love to thank our wonderful sponsors from Tricentis. They are sponsors of this series and been really great. Chantel and Jody have been really great to work with in planning some of the topics and guests and things that we do. So appreciate Tricentis being a good partner. Well, let's get to our topic. We're going to talk about chaos engineering. Before I do a little bit of an intro to that, let's have our two panelists intro themselves. Tammy, would you start? Tell us a little bit about you and who you work for, what kind of work that you do.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mitch. Hi, everyone. My name's Tammy Bryant-Buto, and I work at Gremlin. I'm a principal site reliability engineer. I've been at Gremlin for 4 years. I get to do a lot of chaos engineering. So Gremlin is actually a chaos engineering platform. I do a lot of work of Gremlin on Gremlin. And actually, really interestingly, over the last few years, I've got to see how so many different companies practice chaos engineering because they're our customers. So like JPMC, Target, Walmart, so many more from all over the world. And yeah, bring a lot of interesting experiences along with me everywhere I go, which is fun. And before this, I worked at Dropbox as a site reliability engineering manager. And I was also at DigitalOcean and the National Australia Bank. So been working in the reliability space for 12 years now.
Fantastic. Amazing experience. So we appreciate you being here to share it with us. How about you, Paul?
So again, my name is Paul. I work with Tricentis in incubation and in customer engineering, especially with NeoLoad, the load testing product that they have, the platform there. So Yes, there are a lot of names that we actually share between Gremlin and Tricentis. And just in the Fortune 1000, it's very hard to not be bumping elbows, especially around communities of practice. So, other communities of practice that I tend to be part of are my local Boston DevOps and DevOps Days. I organized the DevOps Days Boston event. I also run some of my own events around observability and security. Just kind of as sort of sandbox to give new people space to do that in a vendor agnostic way. So aside from really appreciating some of these kind of conversations, it's not surprising that we find ourselves not so much stepping on each other's toes, but finding ourselves in the same rooms, right? Talking with similar people because they have particular problems and challenges, and they're looking at, how do we move from a traditional model to a more modern model? What's good about certain approaches and technologies, and what's bad about them, and how do we need to right fit this stuff? So I get to speak with a lot of our, especially Fortune 100 customers, who are in the place where, from a maturity perspective, they have the building blocks of all the other things that are good enough to get to the point where they're actually able to start talking about chaos, or maybe resiliency is a little bit more corporately convenient to say it.
In some circles, that's a little more palatable, right?
Yeah.
Well, and also folks may notice my co-host, Alan Schimmel, is also CEO of Techstrong Group, is absent today. He's on hiatus. Well, he's on special assignment. He's at another venue doing some other things. So he'll be back with us on our next episode, of course. So chaos engineering, I know it never happens, but sometimes we throw about these terms, people adopt them, people make them their own, and it turns into something it's not, co-opt them. And oftentimes if you're approaching this as a new topic, or something you're looking to learn about, is like, well, what is it? And I know you all have been doing this for a number of years. Maybe could we give folks a working definition of chaos engineering? Tammy, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The one that I like to use is thoughtful, planned experiments designed to reveal improvements in our systems. So, and when you think about it like that, this helps you understand how it's changed over the last 10 years. Chaos Monkey was created 10 years ago now, and that was more about like randomly shutting down EC2 instances, like very narrow, small view of chaos engineering. It's grown so much over the last 10 years. So I like that thoughtful, planned experiments where we're looking to make improvements.
Yeah, I can't do much better on that, other than to add to at the end of that statement was systems. And systems, as a DevOps nerd, right? Systems are the multi-body problem, which is the people, process, and technology. So, we oftentimes think that chaos engineering is all about our systems and the resiliency of our systems, but it has a lot to do as well with proactively understanding how to prevent, or how to flesh out a plan. This idea that you had in your mind about how you would respond to certain things. Well, let's actually try that. And maybe we don't just try that straight up in prod right off the bat. So,
it's interesting. It's funny that you mentioned 10 years ago, Chaos Monkey. Seems like it hasn't been that long. Wow. But that sort of started the conversation and us thinking about it. It's this chaotic, send something out there that's going to randomly try to break things before they break and find where those flaws are. And while that's an element of it, your definition, Tammy, also puts more of an SRE engineering mindset to this too, right? We need to be able to measure and find out where we have the flaws, because just because something breaks doesn't mean that's where the break fix needs to happen. I'm curious, and also, why does this overlap so much with SRE? You could argue it overlaps or intersects, works closely with observability, some of the testing work that you do. There's a lot of things that kind of live in this space together. How would you make sense of that? How do you fit that together for people? Paul, why don't you go?
Well, I think some sense of in the old days, right? Mm-hmm. It used to be there were different people for different reasons, and there was a process, and it took a long time. And in many ways, that was because there were a lot of things that kind of batching up. 15 years ago, continuous motions were not the primary default. And so there were large, big batches. Now we're in a lot of small, and especially with distributed systems, right? Especially with distributed architecture, fantastic. We solved for a problem, which is how do we be able to update these things independently? But as it turns out, they're not really independent, especially when you ship them up to a cloud. Now, all of a sudden, you introduce network latencies that you didn't expect. When you change architectures from sort of synchronous to asynchronous, right? That really changed the equation of what you need to ask. So what we find is that it's not good enough to be in a silo. It's not good enough to have siloed knowledge in the organization. It's not just enough to, let's say, run a performance test and barf somebody a report that has nothing to do with what was the impact to the server's services, right? And also, even on a perfect day, if that happens, we're still only testing a certain amount of the distributed happy path, as I would call it. Where resiliency engineering comes into play is when we start to say there needs to be a way to not inject faults, but to Tammy's point, to be able to hypothesize what happens if and when. And so, in a strict performance and reliability engineering, like when I go and engage customers and we have these discovery conversations that exposes what's their practices today and where they want to move, one of the things that I find oftentimes not in their purview is the architectural diagrams. Now, architectural diagrams start somewhere and then, stale. And so you have to kind of update those with what's the reality of the system a year after you shipped it, or so on and so forth. But even just being able to draw the boxes on the whiteboard and say, this is the ideal way that the thing is set up, right? You can get these Visio diagrams or these, SketchUp diagrams or whatever from certain people. Well, that's step one. Step two is to actually look at that diagram and go, where are the most likely bottlenecks? Where are the most likely points of failure? Or where is the least amount of resilience? And you can start, you need to get information on the table, right? Before you can make any kind of informed hypothesis. Even before, there's things that resiliency and chaos engineering are great for. And then there's a lot of things that it's not. Same thing with where I come from, the old load testing background, right? There are some things that it's great for and some things that it's not. But taking a sense of give the information up front to kind of say, what is the holistic picture? To answer your question, Mitch, I think the reason why we're blending and why this sort of overlaps with SREs is because in the old siloed model, nobody cared about the big picture. Maybe except for the architecture person, or worse, maybe the operations people that are dealing with fires in production, then trying to retroactively find time with the product teams, only to find that they don't have time because they're busy shipping new features and have no error budgets, no time for tech debt, architectural debt and stuff like that. So it becomes a big cluster when you have that sort of those kind of mentalities in. And I kind of think SREs is almost like mini product, like product managers is one way to say it, but that's got a specific word. Managing directors, right? Of how this thing is actually going to run really well. Pause
that for a second, because I'm going to jump into SRE. And Tammy, I want you to get a chance, because you've said a lot there, Paul, and we want to unpack some of this. So jump in, Tammy.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. So I'm a CNCF ambassador. And one of the really interesting things is if you look at the CNCF landscape, it's really cool. You can see all of the cloud native technologies on there. Chaos engineering right now fits under observability and analysis. And to me, like what I would love to see in the future is actually that there's a reliability section where we would have tools that are like chaos engineering, but also incident management, alerting. I do feel like these actually fit better under the reliability banner, but that doesn't exist yet. Like, it's actually what we're talking about is very much like future, like forward thinking types of works. It's actually quite new. Even though Chaos Monkey was created 10 years ago, chaos engineering has only really started to become much more popular over the last, I would say, 2 years. And, when I was talking to people 4 years ago, they didn't even have monitoring and alerting observability tools that they were using regularly or that they trusted worked. Now that's changed like 4 years from then. So that's my thoughts there of like where chaos engineering fits in terms of like SREs, how come SREs practice chaos engineering or are fans of it? For me, the reason I do it, and I've done it for many years now, is because for me, it was the fastest way to be able to make an improvement. And that's what you're always trying to do as an SRE, because you're so busy, you know, with all of the other work that you have to do. You're on call, maybe you're getting paged a lot when you first join a team. You're helping give advice to teams about what best practices are for how to set up everything that they're doing. You're doing automation work. So whenever you can find a way to make an improvement, to like move the needle that you can actually measure and show everyone, like, hey, like we did this failure injection work, we ran all these experiments. And, you know, one of my big wins was I got a 10x reduction in incidents within 3 months because of practicing chaos engineering, identifying what we needed to fix, and then just getting those things fixed. Even if it's like a temporary fix until we can do the permanent fix, at least we're not getting paged like constantly. So that's like why I think SREs love chaos engineering. But then the other thing I would mention is that over the years, it's kind of changed, like who is practicing chaos engineering. So I would say like 4 years ago, it was definitely pretty much all SREs that I talked to that were doing chaos engineering. And they either were doing it as part of their role within the SRE team, or they'd actually created another team called the Chaos Engineering team. And it was SREs doing chaos engineering as a full-time job. And that's all they did. And now, though, what I see is we still have lots of SREs doing chaos engineering, even more than before. There's those dedicated chaos engineering teams, but there's also QA teams that are practicing chaos engineering. That's really popular now, and performance engineering teams. And I'm actually seeing product managers say, we want to do chaos engineering for our products that we're launching. So yeah, it's like expanded, which is exciting.
It really is interesting. And it's a topic that's been coming up, I don't know, the last couple of months, because observability is so much in front of everybody. Chaos engineering, all these SRE, all these topics is, you know, I was thinking about Chaos Monkey, and you're mentioning that. That was really just a representation of the world we're now living in, and not Chaos Monkey itself, but everything is changing all the time. And you can't do manual things. You know, it can't be manual break fix all the time anymore, because the environment's changed by the time you might go to break fix it, right? And so using automated tools and engineering approaches both elevates the operational role to be more than, you know, up, down kind of monitoring kind of things, and really getting into how do we help improve the reliability of our systems. Do you think our organizations really adopting more of a seriousness around operations and what this means because of observability and chaos engineering? Is that really happening out there in the real world, as opposed to here in video land where we like to talk about this stuff?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the shared customers that Gremlin and Tricentis have, I shouldn't probably name them, but they're well in the Fortune 50, and they are in the large healthcare and insurance provisioning vertical. And their team of performance and reliability people have been around. They know how to use their tools. They push forward in terms of how do we automate some of this stuff. There's a lot of appetite and interest of, you know, the 500 plus teams of product teams that they actually serve, to move away from this sort of center of excellence, you know, attitude, or, you know, the pool of knowledge only over here, to start building those into automated processes. So I was working with them about 4 months ago to make sure that there are proper sanity checks in terms of performance before they actually move on to a big test? Okay, well, a big test, but also moving on in those big tests and done in a frequent basis is the Gremlin, the chaos injection that allows them to actually prove that just because a couple of servers go down, and this is interesting, it's not just about scale. It's not just about the infrastructure, right? Maybe at the beginning, Chaos Monkey and those tools were all about just testing and proving that infrastructure could come back reliably. But what they actually do, and a lot of our customers actually do this with Neoload, is not just, it's not just about putting pressure on your systems. It's about handling these long-running tasks, especially in insurance and healthcare. There are claims processing that takes upwards of minutes to go through all these like back asynchronous queues and stuff like that, from system to system. And what they need to do is they need to push that workload into the system, maybe even use a tool to generate data, push the workload into the system monitor the little points of how the data is going through the system, and then actually at the end verify that regardless of what happened, because Gremlin was engaged to take some nodes or some servers down, that 100% of the claims that were supposed to go through the system are actually through the system. I would consider that more like data regression, right? But it is a reliability factor and a resiliency factor of your system to be able to say, there is a standard set of things that we provide as a community of practice, not a center of excellence, a community of enablement and practice. And we've already built patterns in pipelines that help you take advantage of some of that self-service without having to know a ton about it. There is a standard set of things that we do in the default chaos injections. There's a standard set of things we do to put pressure on the system or to help you push all your data through the system and verify it afterwards. And those two things have to go hand in hand. Mitch, I think to your point, doing things manually, right? There's no such thing as a useful chaos experiment where you're just opening the browser and trying it as one person. You need statistical significance, whether you do that in production. And potentially, there's issues there that I'd actually want to ask Tammy about a little bit later, or whether you're doing this in a pre-prod environment, it's still teaching you things. It's still helping you build that, okay, we didn't know about that. Let's fix the architecture diagram. Okay, we didn't know that it's going to engage those alerting systems. Oops. And now our storage mechanisms, the people on our storage team are freaking out. And they didn't even know why they were freaking out until we started talking with them. That has to be planned. And you have to have emotional and situational intelligence about your organization, especially if it's a bigger organization, before you start doing these things.
It's a great question, which I was going to ask also is, do we do this in production? Is that where the real benefit comes from? Do we do this in test and in sandboxed environments? What do we learn differently from both? I totally get we don't want the security group freaking out when it looks like something's been compromised because we found some buffer control overflow issue. But we do need to know that production is resilient too. I mean, Tammy, where does this belong? What do you do in each of those environments?
Yeah, I always like to say, practicing chaos engineering in production, it's a journey. It's not something that people do on day one ever. And, the way to get there successfully is that you do start in lower level environments. My recommendation actually, I love Paul's term community of practice. What I like to do is tell everyone, learn how to do chaos engineering first in a demo environment, not even actually your applications with your data. Just have a demo application. You can get a great one off GitHub called Bank of Anthos that Google created, and it's an internet banking application. That's an awesome one. We can share the link to that and just inject some failure there because it runs on Kubernetes. You can learn more about how Kubernetes works, doesn't work in different situations. And Gremlin has a lot of different attack types. So there's networking related attacks, resource attacks, state attacks. Those are the categories. For networking, it might be let's inject packet loss. Let's increase latency, resources, disk, IO, memory, CPU. So there's a lot of different things you can do. And often it's also about planning the experiment, combining different types of attacks for different amounts of times. One of my favorite attacks is called a black hole, where you make a service disappear and then you see what happens to its dependencies. And like Paul said as well, it's not just about the service went away, did it come back? It's also how does that look to the user when a user's logged into internet banking and suddenly the balance reader isn't working? Can they send deposits? Can they make payments? Do they see error messages? What actually is their experience? And I think really great SREs, they do think about the user experience. You're really focused on the customer. And that's an amazing skill because I've been on tons of incidents where we were getting so many support tickets from customers saying my data is not there, my data's disappeared. And wasn't that, it was the thumbnail preview service wasn't working. So that's why thinking through how does this impact the user is so important. So I always recommend thinking about it from that perspective. And I generally say to get to production, it takes companies several years. Most companies, I'd say it takes them about 2 to 3 years to start practicing chaos engineering in production. And I think that's totally fine. That makes a lot of sense. And it's good to have that as a big milestone date. We did our first ever chaos engineering in production. This is what we learned. We improved our mean time to recovery by this much. So yeah, I've got lots of cool customers that I've seen do that, and it's really exciting to like celebrate it as well. It's not easy to do. It's a challenge. Yeah.
Kind of a crawl, walk, run, to use that, familiar analogy, but it makes a lot of sense. What do you see? Is there a kind of a typical stages of evolution that people go through? I know they're not probably formally named, but what does that journey look like? So if somebody is in the middle of it, they kind of know where they are, what might be next. Or if they're starting saying, I have no idea what this might look like. Can I get at least some clue of where I'm headed with this? Either one of you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what Paul mentioned there as well, like about how he's working with a customer that's using Tricentis and Gremlin, like that story is like really common, I would say, that folks start a community practice, they help everyone learn how do I do chaos engineering, then they try and think through like what experiments do we want to do here within our organization, how do we automate that? And when you think about automation of chaos engineering, there are different ways to do that. Most common way is actually integrating it into your CI/CD pipelines. So we see a lot of people doing that. Like, for example, with Jenkins. Jenkins is very widely used by a lot of big enterprises. And that way you can just run all of your suite of chaos engineering experiments. People sometimes call it a reliability gauntlet, which I like that term. I think it's pretty cool. It makes it so fun. And it's like, you got to pass the reliability gauntlet. Did you do it or not? And then they report back on the results in an automated way. So when you come in, the next morning or that afternoon, you can see I need to fix these issues because it didn't pass and I'm not able to get to production until I pass all of these experiments. And then the other way you can do it is by scheduling game days to run, but in an automated way. So game days is another great topic. I really love them. Once you run a game day once, you can then automate it and you can say like, let's do the DNS game day, the DNS failover game day every Wednesday. It's just going to happen. And if something goes wrong, then, that's great. We'll go and try and fix those issues. But that's the journey that I see. Definitely like start small, gradually expand your blast radius of teams and experiments and the impact that you're working on. Like I never see anyone be like, let's start really big and then go to smaller. Like,
throw caution to the wind. Let's go for the whole enchilada here. Let's bring it all back.
That has a lot to do too with like the amount of antibodies for failure and risk and security and all the things that are in these larger companies. I only focus on larger companies in this conversation because they oftentimes have problems at scale. They have problems of systems at scale, legacy code as opposed to just greenfield unicorn sneezing rainbows kind of stuff. They also have a lot of compliance and regulation that they have to deal with. And these things I don't consider them as bogging down. I consider them as grown-up problems. You know what I mean? We can argue about the finer points of, what specific PCI compliance thing you don't agree with, but ultimately, like this is business, and there's reasons for Sarbanes-Oxley and stuff like that. So when you have to live in that world, yet you have these potential new technologies or approaches, it's really important not just to, Mitch, you mentioned before we started that it was like, we don't want this to just be a big agreement fest, but I'm having a hard time disagreeing with anything Tammy says. And so if there's any kind of way to sort of challenge, Tammy, what you just said, not the specific points of it, but to take it forward and say, okay, well, the DNS game day, right? Anytime you want to do something, you might get to a point where something is scalable in a community of practice. That's a great point, but that doesn't make sure it happens on a regular basis. There have to be people, like I'm saying, an SRE mindset that's almost like a managing director of this particular, and you have your portfolio of projects. One of those projects is being the lead on making sure this thing is open, available, good space, safe space, and it happens, right? Same thing with book clubs, same thing with, other community of practice enablement sessions. That takes effort. And so my question or my challenge to all of us is try to figure out how do we make sure that we empower people to sell that up, right? What are a couple of easy takeaways that can be like, not only do we wordsmith and move away from this sort of attack, and like these are faults and we're going to definitely do it in production. How do we move the language to an appropriate way? I think things are happening there, which is good, but also how do we arm and empower people who see the value from a technical perspective, but don't necessarily know how to sell that throughout the organization? What would you say to that, Tammy?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, I get asked this a lot from folks. How do I learn chaos engineering and how do I explain it to others? And so what I did, because I wanted to make that very scalable, like how I would help people learn that. So I created a certificate actually. So if you go to gremlin.com/certification, you can take a free certificate and it only takes 30 minutes, but that's going to really give you all of the information for like, how do I really get buy-in from my leadership team, from my greater org to be able to start practicing chaos engineering. So everyone understands like, what's the ROI, but also to make it inspiring and exciting and to help you learn how to do it technically. Like that's a really good certificate. And then if you do well on that, you pass, there's also the second level, which is the professional level. That's definitely a lot harder. And you're going to have to be someone who's practicing chaos engineering regularly to be able to pass that one. But I would say like, I'd recommend that, you go and get certified because that will help you understand how to communicate chaos engineering and all of the benefits to other people. The other thing I did too, which I can share a link for, is I made a demo Confluence wiki site actually. So many people were like showing me these chaos engineering wikis they'd made. And I was like, these are really cool. Like, I'm just going to collect all the best parts and put it into this one wiki. And then I actually made it public. So anyone across the world can go and look at this like public chaos engineering wiki.
Love it.
So yeah. And it's got a maturity model and everything. So that sort of stuff is pretty cool. And we're continuously expanding on what we add into this wiki. So it's like an open source wiki for everybody.
So that's one of the true signs of an SRE mindset. Right? It's not just do the work and there's no superhero capes, right? That the anti-pattern superhero. No, it's sharing and exploring an area together and kind of helping people, like pushing people forward without necessarily. Yeah, that's super cool. One thing I remember too is I do a similar thing with performance and reliability testing and engineering, and it often comes up is how do you go from like 0 to something, or how do you go from like 5 miles an hour to like 30 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour? And it is a journey, right? And it takes time. But one of the paradigms that I use, I go back to Kent Beck. He has this notion of the 3X model: explore, expand, extract, which has more to do with, finding good ideas and capitalizing on them and being the leader in X and whatnot. And the explore, expand, extract is, in the explore phase, you're digging a lot of little holes to find where the gold is. And it's the same thing when you're starting out trying to build communities of practice. The emotional intelligence is number one, that you have to start small and find where the actual appropriate is, not something that is cool to you, but something that's really cool to multiple people in your organization, right? At Tricentis, as part of incubation engineering, I'm doing a lot of that. And what I find is to have that idea seeded through many people in the organization and get their feedback, but also if it ends up actually being a great idea, to be able to actually now have, sort of preemptive champions for that thing, because they've started to know and aware of that. That's one step in the explore phase. Expand is now you have something scalable. Now, what do we have to do to put in place from a program thinking perspective to make sure that there's at least a certain amount of time where this is executed predictably for people, executed effectively for looking back and saying, how did this program work? And are we capturing the right ROI metrics? And is it really working or is it not? Does it need adjustment? And then the extract phase is mostly like, we've got our stuff together. We know how this works, and it can expand to the entire, that 500 teams kind of situation that I was talking about. That takes a little time. But one last part about that paradigm is in my incubation work, right? I give people time box amount of time. If an engineer comes to me with a good idea, right? Maybe it's chaos, right? They want to go chaos testing, something like that, right? Fine. Let's time box that so that it's not like this is going to last forever. Good project management 101, right? Let's also, if you're a great engineer, but you don't know how to sell this upwards and get alignment and agreement with your leadership or with our leadership internally or with somebody else or with the customer, I can put my business analyst hat on and be your business analyst for hire, for rent for a little time and work together. But the point there is that at the same time, you're evolving the actual technical elements of the thing. You always have to be situationally and organizationally aware of how to sell that, how to grow that out, and figure out how to report that in such a way where people go, yeah, sure, carry on, right? This looks good, as opposed to, what are you doing? No, I'm sorry, So that part of it is just, you've got to pair both sides of this. There's a social and business story. There's a technical side story. And I haven't yet found one single person that can always do that in the 45, 60-hour work weeks that we have. You usually have to pair with somebody else to bring that forward. So let me, since we have a good amount of agreement, I'll play the counterpoint here. Let me present the curmudgeon, skeptical manager you've got to convince to do this. Not that I've ever been that person, of course not. But, that's a whole nother conversation. You can imagine let me go to my boss and say, we need to practice chaos engineering. And say, well, yeah, we need to go play on the highway too. Is there sort of how do you, if you've got skeptics, and I imagine there's a few people out in the audience who've got a tough road to hoe to kind of get to that point where it really is embraced, do you go at this as a reliability load testing problem we want to start to work on? How do you do that without kind of being sneaky about it? Or do you have to be sneaky about it?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts on this because I've definitely been able to help folks do it, and I've done it myself. So usually what I like to do is talk about people who've already done this and had great success. So often before I had done it myself and I wanted to convince other people, I would just say things like, hey, the National Australia Bank that I worked at, they were actually the first bank in the whole world to practice chaos engineering. And here's an article that they actually wrote up that was released. It's in the news. It was a journalist interviewed them about it. They shared all of their wins that they had from doing it. This is a long time ago in 2012. So being able to share something like that, then people go, oh, wow, a bank is doing this. And if banks are doing it, then, I feel like everyone else should do it because they're always the ones that are more cautious than anybody else. And they have all these compliance requirements and regulation requirements. But the way to think about it too is, I feel like chaos engineering is a nice evolution on disaster recovery. So if you also link it back to disaster recovery and business continuity planning, then people really understand it. They're like, oh, I do my quarterly DR activities. Instead of doing it just quarterly, let's do it more regularly. Let's make sure we pass DR when we're actually being audited. So you can use chaos engineering to proactively make sure you're going to pass it when the DR day comes. So I like that. The other thing that I do at the moment is in 2018, a really amazing book was published called Accelerate. And that book is awesome. It talks about how to practice game days. And it's also based on really amazing data that Gene Kim collected with Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble based on all of the Puppet DevOps reports. So they talk there about how actually stability is so important. You need to have stability first to be able to have speed. So, speed depends on stability. So I definitely recommend that folks should check out that book. But that's basically all that I say. And then everyone's like, okay, you convinced me, let's do it now.
Kind of educate ourselves, right, of what people are already doing. And, there's a body of knowledge, a body of work we're building on. We're not just let's go, whimsically try this out. Exactly. Any thoughts, Paul, from your perspective?
Yeah, Mitch. So going back to the original sort of situation that you painted, which is, okay, I think we really need to do this thing. You walk into your boss's office and we really need to do this thing. And they go, well, we've got a million other things and this is kind of scary. And, we could do a lot of things, but we're not going to do that. Well, you've already walked into your own brick wall. You created a brick wall for yourself. I would say it's not about trying to take the technical tack. It's not about trying to take the culture tack. It just step back and use a framing like situation, impact, result. Look at the business and go, wow, there's quite a few Sev 1 incidents in this particular project. Okay, well, that is directly affecting business. So you don't even have to know the numbers about that to know that that's a pain. That is painful for people to go through in reviews, right? When they have to stand up and say, why is this going down? Or why is this not getting out to production as fast as it should be? Those are very painful moments for VPs of engineering, for product managers, right? And so not to poke them right in their pain spot, but to say, okay, let's start from that space that actually impacts the business or means something to the business. Then let's walk back and go, that's the situation. What's the impact to the business? And the result is that we're fighting fires more than we're spending time doing other meaningful things. And so you can do that situation impact result. That's just a framing you can put on things to start to think more like user, more like business. And then start to go, okay, in that landscape of what I know about material impact to the company or the business or the organizational or the division that I'm working for, how would I work this thing that I feel is the right thing to do? The thing that, is, it's not just cool and shiny. There's reason for this. How do I work that into that conversation? I used that framing with Fortune 15-ish just yesterday when we were doing a discovery session, right? And then to be able to kind of pivot that across what's the current situation and what's the desired situation. And you can use situation impact result on a current situation as well as on a desired situation and get a story out there that most people, you hand that to your boss and you go, well, this is actually a set of problems that we experience. We are losing velocity points. We are losing story points to this. Whether you're in the engineering or the product management space, that matters. The impact of this is X, right? I talked with somebody else and they validated that this is some serious impact. This is the quantification of that. And then the result is X. And so the desired situation, if we want to walk backward, situation impact result is result impact situation, is that we actually have to go, if we want this result, we have to have this kind of impact. And therefore we have to have this kind of situation. And oh, by the way, that situation includes resiliency in our thinking. So it's just a way to construct a story that other people can comprehend instead of just starting with the tools and starting with, like, I agree, success stories, Tammy, are very important, right? That's the evidence, that's proof, right? But proof points way down at the bottom before people are even TLDR it for me, right? Like, how does this affect me? How does this affect people above me, right? What if we don't do this? That has to be there, I think, for most people to get it right off the bat.
Yeah, I sometimes coach people, and one of the things I offer is that virtually every manager wants two things. They want people who solve problems, and they like to make decisions, right? They don't just go to meetings. They like to make decisions. Yeah. So I can imagine, to what you said, Tammy, about, hey, we're struggling to meet DR. Like the last two have been hell to get through, sort of our own, our own unicorn project or whatever. Or it's, we're having some problems with this part of it. This is like the third time we've seen this happen. I have some ideas, some things that we can try and share if we wanted to go down that path and see if some of this will help us. So you can come to somebody with, we have this problem, not news to you. I know you're struggling to try to figure out how to solve it. And I've got some ideas, maybe some solutions, and we can try it. And see what kind of results we get. Well, we're close to the end of our time. I'd like to wrap up for have both of you, if you were, and you probably do, if you were mentoring someone in an SRE role, utilizing chaos engineering, or on that journey to bringing that into their organization. I know it's always hard to boil it down to one thing, but what is a piece of advice or learning that you would share to somebody who might be mentoring? Tammy, would you go first?
I think one of the things that I like to say when I'm mentoring folks is what are your own personal goals? And if you imagine yourself in the future in 10 years, what do you want to be doing? And a lot of people, they really want to be the best engineer that they can be possibly. So it's what should I learn? How do I do that? And, how do I share my ideas for what I would like to do? So a lot of it actually is I tell folks to focus on developing your communication skills, but also just be super fun to work with, bring joy to work, make it engaging and exciting for everybody else, share new things that you're learning and finding. And that just creates this awesome, collaborative environment. So, yes, you need to learn your technical skills, but also there's all these other things that are going to really help you with your career, especially if you want to practice chaos engineering. I focus a lot on how can I try and make chaos engineering inspiring and engaging? Because I think that's just makes work also more fun and great as well. And you get the results too. So it's like win-win, you know?
You do that. You definitely do that. Just preparing for this.
Example of that.
Going through the pantheon of stuff that was out there that Tammy put out there is really great. Speaking of the one bullet point I would say is own your own learning, right? No, I'm as much as we must push the certain responsibility of allowing us to have a knowledge and learning organization in companies. It is the responsibility of the employer to properly coach and bring people up and learn. The fact is, like, you'll go from organization to organization. What stays the same is you, right? What you're responsible for is still you. And the number one thing that you can do is be responsible for your own learning. So, read books, watch videos, like take time to do this, right? Even if it's a little bit of out of office stuff, definitely have a life separate from work, but find a way to carve some professional development time either into your full-time job if you have the luxury of that, if you have the right culture of that. And if you don't, you're still responsible for yourself. So find the time, the little bit of time, if you can, outside of that. And figure that out. It doesn't have to be hours a week. It can be a half hour a week. It can be small bits. In that, speaking of, I think in the show notes, we'll be adding some links. Tammy, you mentioned one link to a couple of links to
the wiki,
stuff like that.
Yeah.
I sent over the two links is bit.ly/chaos videos and bit.ly/chaos deck. The videos is to a video playlist that I put together of meaningful things, some of which Tammy's in for this show. So if you want to learn more, there's literally dozens of hours of video in total there, and you can kind of start small and figure out what works for you. The deck is also one of the things that I put together for one of the analysts. Our approach is, the approach of chaos engineering and what are some of the factors that go into that journey and how to start engaging people right. That's also there as well.
That's
wonderful. Awesome. Go ahead, jump in there, Tammy.
Oh, just saying that's awesome. Like I find often folks say to me, how do I learn more? Where do I go? So that's really cool that Paul's created these playlists. So I definitely recommend checking that out. That's how I learn. I watch so many videos still, on this exact topic. So I'm continuously trying to grow myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to add one piece of advice I would offer is when someone offers you a resource, that means they've been through a lot of things. And this is the top. It's one of the cream of the crop. Yeah. Use it. Take advantage of it. Why wouldn't you take advantage of all their time they've spent finding all those videos, pulling together those wikis, whatever it might be? Yep. Well, Tammy, Brian Buteau, and Paul Bruce, thank you to you both. Thank you to your organizations, Gremlin and Tricentis, for having you with us today. Appreciate all your sharing. I know we could explore this a lot more, and hopefully we'll get to do that in a future topic to you. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. Sure and check out our next DevOps Unbound and our DevOps Unbound roundtables.
Thanks so much, Mitch. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Mitch. All right, ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Matt Uli, who's Chief Product Officer for Arculix by SecureAuth. We're going to be talking about passwordless access to infrastructure. So we're getting rid of those passwords finally. It's been a long time coming. And there's a whole effort called the FIDO Alliance, and Arculix is contributing to that effort on the infrastructure side. But let's jump into it. Matt, what exactly is this FIDO Alliance about? We know that Microsoft, Google, and Apple are involved, but how does it apply to infrastructure, and where are we going?
Well, the FIDO Alliance is a group that's been around for a while now. And they started with a mission on moving to a passwordless world. The first step they took was basically making integration with authenticators ubiquitous. So their first version is they delivered a common protocol that allowed everyone to be able to work with almost any authenticator. So the authenticators could support the protocol, and then any vendor could support it. So they really opened up the flexibility and options organizations had to just use a wide range of authenticators simply. The next thing the FIDO Alliance did was FIDO2, was it became part of W3C. So it became part of the web standard and enabled passwordless authentication for web applications and websites. What they've done, what's happening more recently, which you just referred to, is I consider the third major phase, is that Microsoft, Google, Apple, these major players are adopting more of the FIDO2 protocol deeper into their infrastructure, which is really helping the industry gain much further momentum toward a true passwordless environment, where it's not just for the web applications, but all of the things around the operating systems and the systems that make it a little difficult to provide for passwordless now. There's still a password, and you occasionally have to work around things in the operating system. All of these are being phased out. There's more to this, and I'm excited about it. Some of the things are allowing for things like omni-channel. So I'm pairing a device with myself. I can move to another device. It's also paired with me. And I have a streamlined passwordless authentication across both. It's both my identity is recognized on both. These are major shifts forward for usability and balancing security and usability.
How will that get applied to infrastructure then? I mean, IT people have been using credentials and passwords to access things using certificates, and we all know that there's probably more backdoors in the systems than we should probably admit, but people like to have quick ways into things. So how will this change the way we think about accessing infrastructure going forward?
There's a number of things there. Everything from the typical end users and then the admin. So I'll go ahead and take both of those on. From the IT perspective, I've had conversations with CISOs, directors of security, directors of identity for a while now, infrastructure teams, and they're actively moving to put MFA, but the MFA burden starts to be intense where people have to do nonstop multi-factor authentications every time they're accessing applications, resources, doing infrastructure server updates. What's happened over the years is adaptive authentication has allowed that to limit the number of authentications. Passwordless lets it take it further. So the password just is no longer part of that MFA journey. I get to do a more streamlined journey. I might stay with multi-factor. I might go with single factor biometric. So the admins who are accessing the infrastructure, the certificate-based approach, things like a virtual smart card, these types of approaches just become options in that larger scheme. And I just get to take password and all the human risk that comes with that, all the credential risk that comes with that, and just ignore it. I go around it and use these other options. For the end user side, not admins, I have security teams and IT teams excited about how they're going to be able to provide a much better end user experience for admins and normal users, while at the same time not giving up security, actually doing moves to improve security at the same time.
Does this mean I'm out of the business of managing secrets, or am I just managing them differently?
That's a very good question. And the answer is I'm not out of the business of managing secrets. I just have different secrets. The certificate example is there. I'm still going to do secrets management. I just will be doing fewer password ones and more certificate ones, more keys that I'm going to be managing. On the password side, we're still not at the point where the passwords are gone. We're still on that journey. What the FIDO Alliance is doing along with these major vendors is actually moving us along that path. It's a good and exciting step forward. But yes, the shift is happening to where we're going more to non-password secrets as opposed to password secrets.
How long might this journey take? And if it's not a password, then what does it look like? Is it biometric? Is it something else? Or how do I manifest the actual credential?
In this case, there's a variety of things, and some of what you're asking is part of that journey. So am I going to get to the point where the operating system has no password? Today, for instance, with Windows Hello, there is a password under the covers. If you look at what Mac is doing, they have the Vault. Again, there's secrets being managed. There are options for applications and devices where you're using things that the features are called virtual smart cards, and under the covers, it's a certificate. So there's going to be some type of certificate or key, period, because we have to. The nature and how we exchange them under the covers deeply will probably stay close to the same. But the idea of having to do a password, doing password resets, having credentials stolen, these will be gone. And I'm going to start tying the biometrics to certificates, and what they're looking to do with FIDO Alliance, with FIDO2 and the operating system is actually being able to use some of these certificates shared across different devices that are bound to me. So I validate I'm me to that device, that associates with the certificate. Then that's used basically as a credential as you described, and I'm able to give access. So these are major move forwards where I'm removing the human risk from it. I still have credentials, of course, because I still have to have an identity.
Mm-hmm. Will we still be in the business of changing and updating passwords, though? Because it seems like, half of the requests for support involve somebody sending an email going, I forgot my password, or I can't remember my password. And there's a lot of automation in that space, but there's still a lot of manual effort. So can we get out of that business?
We're definitely on a road where that effort will be reduced to the point where it eventually goes away. I look forward to the point where it eventually goes away. When I look at this and have conversations with organizations, there's the cost that everybody's familiar with of the cost of help desk supporting me through this process, the cost of automating that process. There's the cost of me distracting myself from the work I'm trying to do to reset passwords. Getting to the point where I never issue a password to the user will be a step that occurs before we get to the point where they're probably completely out of the operating system. I may be wrong here, but I'm expecting a flow to where the password might be an artifact under the covers that the user never gets. Then it will go away. The operating systems might move faster than that, but that's more or less the path I'm expecting. If you look at what Microsoft's done with Windows Hello, even before FIDO2, you can log in with a PIN, you can do these things. They're just keeping the password in the background. Now, if I could sign up and never see my password, and I'm just using with my facial recognition and PIN, it's already a major step forward because I'm not touching, managing, and messing up my password, let alone all of the additional efforts of password complexity, software that allows for denied lists, and all of the other things we use to make customers and end users' lives complicated dealing with passwords, letting them all go away.
What are the compliance implications for this? Because a lot of times when you're trying to achieve compliance, you're trying to prove that the passwords were handled properly. And so can we skip that too?
It will definitely make a change. What's interesting is as passwordless was just starting to come, and with FIDO2 and the web-based passwordless, the most common question I had from leaders of identity and security was on the side quietly, hey, do I have to give up MFA to get passwordless? The answer is no. You do what makes sense for the risk of the situation, for the context for the user to get it secure access and deliver the right user journey. But to your question, where we're going with this is I need to have the right controls. That control is basically going to be, maybe it's something around NIST, maybe it's something you're doing a little more specific to your industry and focus, where you need to have a level of authentication or a level of confidence the user is who they're claiming to be, not just the initial login, but over time. If I'm doing that with a certificate, a smart card, biometrics, I'm still going through the right hurdle. I just don't have to deal with the password. And all of the other controls of the passwords go away. Your other point from earlier is still very valid. I didn't get out of the business of doing secrets. I just have a different secret. So all the compliance controls around that remain.
Mm. What's your best advice to folks about how to get started with this? I think a lot of people kind of like the general idea, but have no idea how to go about actually, beginning this journey without trying to boil the ocean. So what's the simplest thing I can do today to kind of get my organization moving down the path tomorrow?
The customers that I've seen that are most successful internally, so skipping all the technology for a moment, the ones who are rolling it out and having the biggest impact internally are usually starting with a certain population within their organization, accessing a certain set of resources and making that passwordless, getting people excited, then getting other people to ask for it, and then start rolling it out further in the organization. I'm working with a current customer, a large bank that's focusing first on their Mac OS, so logging in passwordless to the Mac OS, and then doing non-interactive logins from there. I have other customers that started with all of their admins. I have another group that's starting with, they actually were trying to drive funding and started with their executive team and then started working down. So really, it's getting that early success with a key set of applications and users, showing that to the rest of the organization, then expanding. But it's not difficult with the right solutions, and there's some options out there.
All right, folks, you heard it here first. We might get to the point where IT people are not essentially glorified police officers keeping access to controls to systems, and we can move on with our lives and do something a little more rewarding. Hey, Matt, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Cody J. Brown here again with some upcoming programs from Techstrong Learning. So tomorrow, Wednesday, August 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern, DevOps.com and Metallic present Modern Data Protection with Metallic, Hybrid Kubernetes and Beyond. This program will unpack the critical need for dedicated data protection and how Metallic Data Management as a Service safeguards your data from deletion, corruption, and ransomware attacks. Following right after that, on Wednesday, August 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Security Boulevard and Snowflake present Implementing Identity Access, Prioritization, and Risk-Based Alerting for High-Fidelity Alerts. Now, this session will review how to prioritize your identity and assets and dynamically adjust alert severity based on prioritization. So that actually concludes the list of live learning programs that we have coming up this week. So I'd just like to take a moment to mention that we do have a catalog of learning programs spanning several years, and we're proud to continue to bring you a live educational format with our workshops and our webinars and our panels. So if you haven't registered for one of our live programs in the past, just please take a look at what we have coming up, or tune back in Thursday and I'll have a couple of recommendations for you taking place next week.
Hello, friends, and welcome to The Lab, a monthly show where we look at the latest and greatest developments in software development, DevOps, and the cloud. I'm your host, Brendan O'Leary, coming today from a pretty warm and getting warmer Annapolis, Maryland, on the East Coast of the United States. For those who may not know me, I'm a developer evangelist at GitLab, which means that I get to talk to a lot of amazing folks throughout the industry and the software engineering space about what it means to really get code shipped to production. Today, I want to focus on GitLab 15.2. As you know, if you're a longtime viewer of the lab, we spend most of our time focused on the latest GitLab release, which comes out every month on the 22nd of the month. And we have a VP of product from back in the day that used to say, greatest release ever, or best release ever, rather. And we think that everyone is, because it's building on the last. But that iterative way of building every month and releasing every month is really what helps us grow GitLab as the One DevOps platform. And 15.2 this month is no different. It's our second iteration of version 15, right? And we're talking about version 15 as this way to bring additional exciting DevOps capabilities into GitLab's One DevOps platform. And so today I'm excited to chat about some of the updates that I found to be the most interesting, including live preview diagrams in a WYSIWYG editor, new timelines for incidents, the addition of group, subgroup, scan execution policies, and a new change failure rate chart where we can visualize the stability of the software we're shipping, and of course, much more. So let's dive right into it. First, let's talk about live preview diagrams in the Wiki WYSIWYG editor. So GitLab flavored Markdown, which is the Markdown that you use when you're in GitLab issues or the Wiki and other places in GitLab comments. It supports Mermaid, Plant UML, and Croquis diagramming. But writing anything other than the most basic diagram in those formats can be kind of cumbersome without being able to see, hey, what's the live preview of what this diagram is going to look at? And so with the WYSIWYG editor, it allows you to toggle between the raw source and the static preview, where there's external tools that you can use to do the diagrams. But 15.2 introduces the live rendered preview of your diagram right inside the Wiki's editor. So now as you write the diagram in the code block, GitLab detects the diagram type and displays the preview of it. And so when it is enabled, a live preview renders the above the code block and updates as you type, so that you can ensure that you've got the formatting correct to Plant UML or Mermaid or whatever it is that you're formatting it is, and that the output is going to be exactly what you expect. Another big update in 15.2 are the redesigned merge request reports. Merge request reports are obviously a very important part of code review and providing insight to the impact that changes are going to have and improvements to meet the standards for your project or the compliance standards that you have as an organization. Right? And those reports are a central part of the merge request, which we say is the central point where you're deciding, are we going to accept this change and what are the changes impact going to be? And of course, that's code, but it's also the application and how it affects the security of the application as well. So now the report widgets all follow our design guidelines for layout and hierarchy and content sections. So it's very consistent, easy to scan, and very usable when you're reviewing a merge request to see what is the output of each report. And hopefully these improvements will make it easier for you as a merge request reviewer or the developer that made the merge request to find what's the actual information in each report that I can go and improve the security or improve the test coverage or what have you for this merge request. We also added the ability to enforce IP address restrictions for Git over SSH. So limiting the access to requests from a trusted set of your IPs is one way you can help improve security, right? It's part of a security defense in-depth effort. And until now, only the API and the UI, the kind of HTTPS side of GitLab supported those restrictions, but now, and so for folks in those environments, they might say, okay, we're going to just block SSH access completely. But SSH now adheres to the same restrictions so that you can grant access only to requests coming from IP addresses in your list of IP addresses of known range. And then next is, one of my favorite topics, right? We talk about the DORA 4 a lot on the lab. And this is one of the DORA 4 is the change failure rate. And so now this change failure rate chart is available for visualizing the stability of your software over time. And so this trend chart for the DORA change failure rate metric shows the percentage of deployments that cause an incident in production environment over time. And this is now the fourth DORA chart that's available in GitLab that provides insight into the value stream and velocity and reliability trends. The DORA 4 metrics, are often used and should be used more by DevOps teams to measure their maturity and performance and have something that they can actually take action against as a team. There's also new group and subgroup scan execution policies. So your security and compliance teams can now apply a policy uniformly to all of the projects by scanning execution policies at the group and subgroup level. So this is helpful for large organizations that have a large number of projects that maybe have different compliance requirements. Policies defined for the group or subgroup will flow down into all those child projects automatically. There's no need to define it at each project. And so to get started with this, your group owner can apply a security policy to your group on the group page on security and compliance and policies page. We also have a new incident timeline feature within GitLab. This is, what happened during an incident is really important, and capturing it in real time is a very important practice that facilitates learning for how you could maybe prevent it but also how you can improve your incident response over time. Yeah, of course, asking someone that's in the middle of an incident with, their hair on fire to do additional administrative tasks or try to reconstruct the timeline of events afterwards is, leads to incomplete information or less than accurate information. And so the GitLab incident timeline is designed to make information captured during the incident or after the incident very easy and efficient. So this is an MVC, right? Remember, we released minimally viable changes, but it's possible to add new timeline events manually, delete timeline events, and view the incident timeline. And there's going to be great things to come as we're able to iterate on this new feature. And then, of course, there's a lot more great things in this release. It includes, setting your image pull policies directly in your pipeline configurations, improvement to the contribution calendars for your private contributions, improving to compliance adherence, right? So that you have several new audit events for compliance for group level merge request approvals, if two-factor authentication was disabled, and then in addition to, streaming more audit events for Git operations, project forks, merge request creation. And you can also send custom HTTP headers to be created for those streaming events, which is useful for, the third-party systems that are going to manage those events. And we also continue to enhance the developer experience with lots of usability improvements. The live preview diagrams is one, the timelines one. These things are focused on the developer experience and making DevOps teams more efficient and effective. I encourage you, of course, to check out GitLab's full list of over 40 improvements on about.gitlab.com, or if you go to the homepage, which is about.gitlab.com, you can click on resources and then releases on the drop-down menu, and you can take a look at what came out in GitLab 15.2 and what's planned for future upcoming releases. So thanks so much for joining today and humoring me as I talk to you through some of the great improvements in GitLab 15.2. Refer to the blog again for full details if you need more information about any of these things. Each one of these features has the link directly to the issue that our product and engineering teams used to, ideate and create and then do the work against these improvements, and also the documentation link to learn more about how it came out. So anyway, thanks so much for viewing, watching today. You can find me on the internet most places at O'Leary Crew, OLEARYCREW. Twitter is where I spend most of my time, so that's probably the best place to get in touch. And if you have an idea for a future episode or want to discuss anything from today's episode, I'd love to hear from you there. Again, the lab is produced monthly, so thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you next month in the lab. Stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
And welcome back. Great to be having you join us here at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. It's what an active environment. I'm joined by a friend from Lightstep. Good to have you, Ted Young. Not Ted Young. That's a friend of mine. Sorry.
No,
Ted Young. It is Ted Young. I have a friend named Ted Young from a few years back. And you're head of developer education, right?
That's correct.
At Lightstep. I'd love to talk about Lightstep, but I know you're also, co-owner, co-founder of
one of the
OpenTelemetry.
co-founders of OpenTelemetry.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about what's fascinating. There's so many fascinating things about this. I use this as an example of how open source has transformed, where it really truly is open source in a community of vendors who are all adopting it, rather than it becoming a product for a vendor, per se. I'm curious, just to start with, Why do you think that's happened? Why have vendors so openly, no pun intended, said, yeah, this is the right thing to do. This is not where we're going to differentiate. We're going to do things on top of open telemetry.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of reasons. There's reasons why this is really attractive for end users, but the reason why we were able to get all of the vendors and cloud providers on board was, I would say, basically two reasons. One is this is a telemetry project, so it's about standardizing the language systems used to describe what they're doing. And if you don't have a standard like that, then every company or project, including all the open source projects, has to go in there and provide their own instrumentation for every programming language and every major open source library in that programming language. And if you roll back time, it was possible to provide an observability tool kind of focused on one piece or a small subset of languages and libraries. Like, I think New Relic got their start as like Ruby on Rails development. There's surely other companies that got their start on like Java Spring observability. So that world has now morphed into this world where everybody is running these large distributed systems made up of tons of microservices, all heterogeneous, all different languages, different libraries. The rate of library development and language development has increased. And so there's just so much software out there now. Every single project duplicating the effort of providing instrumentation and trying to keep up is becoming more and more untenable. So that's one really valid reason of like, let's stop duplicating all of this effort and instead combine forces and provide one single way for everyone to describe what they're doing. The other reason why I think it's valuable for vendors is everyone is going the direction of open source, and no one wants proprietary libraries mixing in with their application code. And especially for something like instrumentation, where it's a cross-cutting concern, so it's not just sitting in a corner, it's getting inserted everywhere.
Well, it's a library for
like
every instrumentation tool I need. Well, I don't want to do that, right?
Sprinkling instrumentation all over the place, which means if you want to change providers, you have to rip out all of that instrumentation and then replace it with new instrumentation before you could even try another provider. And so that's like a real pernicious form of vendor lock-in, which end users are just not interested in, basically. So that's becoming more and more of a sore point with end users, is having to do that. So if we develop a standard, then the competition moves to who can provide the best analysis, who can provide the best analysis tools to look at the standard data. So that's actually a very nice separation of concerns. Like, we standardize on how systems describe what they do, and then we all compete on who's going to provide the best analysis tool for that standard data. And that was like a trade-off everyone was willing to make. You don't have vendor lock-in anymore, but that also means it's easier to onboard new customers. So if you have faith that the tools you're building are the best, then it sounds like a good deal.
Let's sit back just for a minute. Maybe I should have asked first. Why don't you describe for everyone OpenTelemetry? How would you kind of break it down into what it does?
Sure. So OpenTelemetry is the telemetry portion of observability system. So again, one half of an observability system is applications, servers, hosts, platforms, Kubernetes, things like that, databases, all of these things describing what they're doing. So that's emitting telemetry data. That data then goes into like a pipeline, and then it eventually comes to rest in some kind of analysis tool. So OpenTelemetry is this telemetry portion, everything but the analysis. OpenTelemetry is all the different observability signals combined into one. Traditionally, you had this sort of 3 pillars approach where you had these siloed vertical stacks of logging and metrics and tracing, all totally separate from each other. which put a lot of burden on the operators trying to analyze that data because the data wasn't interconnected in any way. So if you're trying to correlate across all these different signals, you end up having to do that in your head because there's no ways for the machines to help you because the data is siloed. So OpenTelemetry takes a new approach to this, which says all of that data is going to come out in a single stream, and it's all going to be interconnected and correlated. So you can actually build a complete graph of what your system is doing, and then you can apply like statistical analysis and all this other stuff to that graph of data. So in general, it's kind of creating a technology wave in the observability world where you're seeing all these analysis tools go from being a single vertical to being more like an observability platform where they're ingesting metrics, logs, tracing, client telemetry, RUM, eBPF, everything coming into one tool that can then kind of like cross-index and find correlations across all these different signals. So OpenTelemetry is kind of like the first telemetry system to provide the data you would need to power one of these new observability platforms.
And I remember you actually subsumed or brought in open tracing as part of the larger effort.
As part of trying to develop a standard, it's there's this old game called like Katamari where you're trying to just roll everything up into a giant ball, and it kind of went the way of people converged onto two competing systems, Open Tracing and Open Census, which were very similar in many ways. They had some subtle differences, but they were more or less trying to solve the same same problem. But two standards is no standards, and so everyone realized that in order to really make this work, we have to combine these projects into one project. And so that's where OpenTelemetry came out of, the combination of taking the best design sensibilities from open tracing and applying them to the open census implementation, basically, combining those two things together to form a new project. And we did that. That was kind of the final key to bring in all of the people who hadn't been involved in one of those two projects. When they saw the projects had merged, that signaled to a lot of people this was really going to happen as a standard, and then a bunch of new people came in at that point. A lot more behind, a lot of momentum. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, open source projects mature just like any other technology. I know you've had some announcements about OpenTelemetry and its evolution here at the show. Tell us about that. Yeah, so I mentioned OpenTelemetry has three core signals: tracing, metrics, and logs. Tracing has been stable for over a year now. That's the part that everyone's using today if they're using OpenTelemetry. Just this week, we're announcing that metrics has now gone stable, and there are now release candidates for OpenTelemetry metrics available in a wide variety of languages. So I would be encouraging anyone who's interested in OpenTelemetry, interested in metrics, to go try those release candidates out and let us know what you think. And logging is going to go stable, fully stable, probably in Q3. Most of the logging pipeline is in place at this point. It's just finalizing our API, our logging API, is kind of the last piece there.
Most developers are going to understand what you mean by stable when you talk about a branch of the code. Sort of in layperson's term, what does it mean to a certain part of OpenTelemetry to reach a stable state?
Yeah, so one thing we really care about in OpenTelemetry is backwards compatibility, especially backwards compatibility at the instrumentation API layer, because in observability is a cross-cutting concern, right? So you're going to put these instrumentation points everywhere. It's going to go everywhere. All of your code, including open source libraries. We've designed OpenTelemetry to work well as a way for open source libraries to instrument themselves. And so you're talking about millions and millions and millions of API calls everywhere. We don't want to break that. If we ever break backwards compatibility, that's going to cause horrible dependency conflicts for anybody.
Strand technology that
because
can't
you're going to
upgrade.
you're going to be trying to compose all these libraries together, and if they depend on incompatible versions of OpenTelemetry, then that's not going to work very well. So we are very, very compatibility conscious. So we don't declare something as stable until we are completely certain that we are willing to support it basically for eternity. Even if we come up with some fancy new fangled way of doing it, that would show up as yet another new experimental signal, and we wouldn't mutate or otherwise affect the stability of what's already out there, and we would ensure that there's some way to then bridge over to the new thing without dropping support for the old thing. So that's what we mean by stability.
A lot of us that wish that others would do that too, because it is a hassle when APIs overturn and you got to go back and rebuild, rewrite code.
I actually think we've developed some best practices in that space, and we don't talk about that aspect of the project so much, but I think that's something, like you said, I would wish to see from any widely shared library to think more about how you architect what you're providing people so that you can continue to provide new features and change without breaking what people were already dependent on in the process.
Sounds like the subject of a really good book. I don't know if you're interested in writing one. But
well, I actually I just wrote a report for O'Reilly, the future of observability and OpenTelemetry. So I got free print copies here. If anyone's watching, is at KubeCon.
Great.
And you can, if you Google around for that online, you can find a way to download that. We've got you can download it from O'Reilly's website or from Lightstep.
Cool, very good. Anything happening in the Lightstep world that you want to talk about?
Let me see. I think Lightstep is charging ahead with becoming a fully fledged observability platform. So we've been really focused on tracing and tracing-based workflows, but we've recently expanded into metrics as well. And so Lightstep's doing a lot of work to provide a sort of like unified experience across tracing and metrics. I imagine logging will get brought in at some point as well. I don't want to make any promises there because I'm not on the product team. But that approach of having the machines identify all the correlations for you. They can't find the root cause. That's the human still has to interpret what this information means.
There's a lot of work in that correlation, though.
Yeah, because you have this pattern of you look at some data, you make a hypothesis, and then you want to verify whether your hypothesis is correct. And if between making a hypothesis and verifying it, you have to go collect a whole bunch of data and sift through it yourself and look for correlations or signs or symbols, that really slows down how fast you can make a hypothesis and verify it. And so Lightstep really focuses on providing tools that shorten that process. Basically just immediately telling you, hey, this endpoint that's showing a bunch of errors, all those errors highly correlate with a particular Kafka node, or they highly correlate with a particular iOS version, or they highly correlate with a particular VM or a particular version of a backend service. Being able to see those correlations allows you as an operator to quickly get a sense of what's actually going on.
I'm curious, maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not. Why is being such a big contributor, being a co-founder of OpenTelemetry, why is that important to a vendor company, to like Lightstep? Why would they spend all the money and time and effort supporting it?
Sure. Well, I would say like in Lightstep's case, as a young upstart company that's trying to break into this space, you want to prove to people that you're serious, not just about providing a product, but about like actually showing leadership in the industry. Ben Siegelman, one of the co-founders of Lightstep, designed the tracing systems at Google and wrote what's called the Dapper white paper based on that system. And basically all the tracing systems that have come out since then have been based on that Dapper paper.
Sort of the father of, or the origin story of
And
tracing.
so the next step after that, founding his own company, we wanted to continue with that leadership role in this space. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to us. The other reason is this separation just seems right. And if we could get everyone to work with us to make it happen, then we're moving from a world of vendor lock-in to a world where may the best analysis tool win. People are not worried about being stuck or having some painful transition to move from one vendor to another. And since we think we provide, some of the best analysis tools you can get, it's really beneficial for us to reduce the amount of friction that people have to go through when it comes to adopting Lightstep.
I think in the contemporary modern world of open source and kind of thinking about software differently, it makes all kinds of sense.
Yeah. It's also one of those things where it's kind of like, especially with any kind of analysis tool, but especially statistical analysis or machine learning, it's garbage in, garbage out. Like the data coming in has to be really high quality data. And we think by developing that as an open standard, you can get a lot of subject matter experts to come in. You can get a lot of end users and developers feeling like it's worth their time and energy to instrument well and to participate in this process of describing what systems are doing, because they're not just losing that effort to some vendor's implementation, right? Like this is something they can take with them through the rest of their career. So our feeling is that by doing it through an open standard, the end result is just higher quality data coming from more data sources. For example, databases can now start emitting open telemetry data. You're even seeing like cloud providers, like hosted services, starting to emit open telemetry data. So now your traces go from your client to your applications to your backend services, now to SaaS services that your backend services are built on top of. And you're able to get a trace entirely end-to-end, including those services that are being operated by other people, because they can now send you a stream of open telemetry data.
Well, very good. Exciting news, exciting progress, and I think it's exciting for the whole industry. It's great to see what open telemetry, has done and will continue to do. So congrats to you for having the forethought to co-create such a project. So Ted Young, who's with Lightstep and also the Open Telemetry Project, thanks for coming by. Hope you join us again.
Great. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
You bet. Thanks, Ted.
Yeah.
Be back. Please join us for some more interviews. We've got some great folks coming up.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Renuka Nadkami, who's Chief Product Officer for Ariaka. We're going to be talking about SASE and specifically managed SASE and where we are in the evolution of that whole shift and trend. But before we get there, I'd love to get your opinion, Renuka, about what are we seeing at the edge? Because right now, everybody was supposed to have gotten rid of their VPNs and we were supposed to have moved on to SASE because of COVID and the world was shifting. And yet, I still see all these VPNs out there that people are still using. So what seems to be the hurdle to getting rid of VPNs in favor of something that moves us down towards that zero trust path we're all trying to get to?
Yeah, Mike, that's a very interesting observation. We live in very interesting times, and what we are seeing is while there is a desire to move to SASE, while there's a desire to do modernization and digital transformation, call it new application era as I call it, we are still very deeply rooted in what I call as infrastructure era, where all the decisions and the way the businesses were structured were very network centric. So all the users used to be in the offices, all the assets or the applications used to be in the data center. So a lot of design, the operations, the way we thought about security, everything was deeply rooted in the infrastructure way of thinking. And as our, as the industry in general and the customers are moving towards what I call as an application era, there are applications which are anywhere and users are anywhere, thanks to COVID and all the hybrid workforce needs. So now we are trying to figure out how do I make the decisions that we had made, which were very rigid and very static, how do we make them agile and how do we make them adapt to this new reality of application era? And that's where we see a lot of cloud adoption and so on. But what we really believe is the convergence era, which is instead of just thinking about compute, we are now thinking about networking and security. And that's what is zero trust, loosely speaking. But then how do you get to the applications? You do need something. And VPN is that something today. So there is infrastructure in place, there is network in place, there is equipment in place, and we cannot just rip and replace everything that we have. We have to gradually take that journey from infrastructure era to application to eventually what we call as convergence of compute, network, and security, everything together.
To your point, we have had internal IT teams installing all that infrastructure all these years, and of course we have a shortage of not just IT talent, but especially security talent. So do you think we're at some point where more organizations are going to shift towards that managed services model and rely on somebody else to help them co-manage the environment versus, say, trying to roll everything themselves?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, that's like one of the biggest challenges. Back in the day, when we talked about advanced threats and ransomware, they usually targeted high-profile customers, like in financial, and you knew who the targets were. But now the security attacks are very prevalent. They do not discriminate. Actually, anybody and everybody is actually subject to an advanced threat today. And as you rightly said, there is 3.5 million open requisitions in the cybersecurity world, which we believe they are going to be hard to fill even in the next 5 years. So where customers are at is they pretty much don't have a choice but to figure out how to protect themselves. And with this skill labor shortage of people who can configure, who can understand security, there is really not many choices but to essentially take help from the outside. It's not IT outsourcing, but it's really to get help from consultants or try to get help to not just design but also to manage day-to-day operations. We also see a lot of new modern companies which are being formed. They do not actually have a networking team. So there is no such thing as a network team or network security team because they are using infrastructure as a service mostly for compute. And they are actually offloading a lot of these network as a service, as we call it, SD-WAN as a service, and SASE, which is actually a combination of networking and security as a service. So yes, that is going to be more prevalent. It's like somebody mentioned this to me. I really like that analogy. It's like you want SASE and it's a birthday party and you're ordering a birthday cake and somebody brings to you eggs and flour and sugar, right? So that's where the world is today. Customers want the cake, but most vendors are offering them either egg or flour or sugar, which doesn't work, right?
Do you also think that the way we think about managed services has evolved? Because it used to be that meant essentially outsourcing the whole thing to a third-party services provider. And now it feels like, to me, it's much more of a co-managed kind of experience where you're handling the infrastructure, but the IT team is still handling the users and the applications and the things that go along with that. So have we found some sort of happy balance between complete outsourcing and internal IT teams?
That's a great way to call it co-manage. That's something that we also use as a term. And the important piece is the responsibility, the accountability for the compliance, the regulatory compliance, making sure the the audit trails are available, all of that, that always lies with the end enterprise or the customer. So there are things you can outsource, but ultimately there are things that the enterprises and the customers need to have and own. And this is where it's very important to be able to have automation, where you can automate what you need in terms of declarative APIs or even a simple email or a template or whichever format is agreed upon. But once you do that, all the provisioning, all the network surgery, all the routing, all of it is done by someone else. So you don't need to have the expertise on how to configure a BGP route. All you need to know is, if I want to run my business successfully, what is the customer sensitive data that I own, and how am I making sure that it's protected? So that division of accountability and ownership is very important and critical for the co-managed aspect.
It also seems to me one of the issues with the VPNs we have is scaling and the amount of infrastructure I have to throw at that. And I never seem to know how many workers are going to be out of the office or in the office anymore. So has the whole equation become more dynamic, and is that going to eventually finally force people to a different cloud-based architecture? Because the one that we have in place today was great for when 5% of the workers were outside the office, but when half the company's out of the office, it just doesn't really work.
Yes, capacity planning is one of the most interesting challenge that we have been facing of lately. Because earlier, when remote users were at home, their expectations from the service was it was slow and it was difficult to access applications. It was acceptable because it was used rarely when you're sick or when there's few periods of time when you want to work from home. But now working from home is a de facto. So what users expect is they want a LAN-like experience over the WAN. So I want to have the same response time from the applications. When I click on something, I want things to work fast, just like they used to work when I was sitting in my office. And it has multiple implications, because guaranteeing the bandwidth and the user experience is actually one of the hardest problems to solve. And normal security VPN solutions never took that into account. That was never part of the equation, because VPNs always rode on top of the internet, and internet, as you know, the bandwidth and the latency are not predictable and are not deterministic. So we are seeing an evolution where we call secure remote access solution, which is a combination of, because of the SD-WAN capabilities, a combination of guaranteed performance and security, which is the normal encryption that you do between end-to-end tunnel. So what we believe is getting the user from their home to the middle mile or to the cloud from a SSE vendor or a Ariaka cloud, one of those, is actually the only variable now. So what we do is we can have the user have same experience even if they are sitting in some office in China or in Japan, to access the workloads which are now based in, say, US West region. So just like a US West employee would have an experience with the workloads in US West regions of Amazon, a worker who is in China or Japan or any other country in the world will have the same experience with low latency. And I think that's where we are evolving. The industry is not looking for vanilla remote access, which just gives you a tunnel. We are actually looking for a complete customer user experience, which is, like I said, LAN-like experience on WAN.
Right. And there really should be no need to backhaul traffic through data centers that people are trying to access the cloud for if I can give them direct access, so that somebody sitting in Green Bay, Wisconsin can have the same application experience as somebody halfway around the world, and they don't all have to live on top of a point of presence somewhere, right?
That's exactly right.
What's your best advice to folks who are experiencing some sort of cybersecurity shortage, which I think is everybody? But it seems to me the way folks are going about solving that problem is they're relying more on the IT operations team to take more responsibility for executing security operations. So do you think as these two things come together that those teams will look at new architectures and new ways of providing access, because ultimately they need something that is more converged?
Yes, I think the most important thing that we have seen change over the years is the organizational silos. Back in the day, there was a IT team, there was a networking team, network security team, and wherever vendors were selling the products, there were different buying centers, there were different decision makers, there was a different cloud architect team, and that caused a lot of operational overhead, and it also caused a lot of unnecessary expenses, which made the solutions overall extremely expensive. So this is what I always tell customers is when you go from infrastructure to application, the focus is on agility and you end up buying like 4 different things. But as you run them for a couple of years, you quickly find out that the cost of operations gets very high. So now in the convergence era, not only are we looking at technology integration, we're also looking at operational integration, making sure that we don't have redundant processes, we don't have redundant headcount that is, probably actually getting in the way instead of accelerating the process. So to your point, one of the things we see customers who are more towards the right on this journey of the adoption of digital transformation, one of the things we see is they have converged decision making. They may still have different teams, but the decision making is converged, and they are looking at the complete picture of how am I going to get the most delightful customer experience. It's not about how am I going to get the best networking or how am I going to get the best security in the world. It's really more customer centric on the best user experience and the best application experience overall.
What's your best advice to folks, or more importantly, what do you wish that they knew going in when they make this transition to SASE that they learn the hard way?
I think the first thing is to accept that it's a journey. There are always people who have contracts with providers. There are appliances which have certain life cycle, like 4 to 5 years of refresh cycles. So it's kind of it's very naive to think that one day you just turn on the button and say, okay, now I'm adopting SASE. So we talk about meeting customers where they are. We talk about if you have MPLS renewals coming up, you start from that, because you have to do the complete end-to-end planning, and it may take multiple years, it may take multiple cycles, and all of these different pieces of the puzzle. How is your network designed? Who are your providers? How is it terminating? Is it going to the the nearest POP? Where is the nearest POP? Is it secure? And then what services are you offering on that particular service? All of these need to be planned out. And there are multiple integration options with different vendors, where I think the vendors also need to play nice with each other. There is different protocols which are being set up and so on. So I feel it's very important to think of this as a journey and try to move fast. But when you try to move fast, sometimes you have to go slow. That's what my advice would be.
All right, SASE doesn't happen in a day. Hey, Renuka, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Catherine McGarvey, who just joined the Cloud Foundry Foundation Advisory Board, and we have Chris Clark, who's a longtime member of that program and has been contributing to that community forever and a day. And we're going to get caught up on what's going on with the Cloud Foundry PaaS in the age of cloud native. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
And Chris, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. So let's start with Catherine. What is the current state of the art for developing cloud native applications these days? Because we've been at it for a while, but everybody will tell you that building these apps is not necessarily easy. Cloud Foundry's been around for a long time. So are we going to finally get our cake and eat it too? What's going on?
Yeah, great question. So I think what's been really great about the Cloud Foundry community is from its early days, it really understood the importance of getting the developer experience right. And it invested heavily on, I don't care where it runs, run it for me. And this concept still applies even if the infrastructure or that foundational layer changes with Kubernetes. There's still a lot of interest in making it simple for developers to get to that deployment state and doing it in a way where they don't have to know every layer underneath their application to run it well. And that's where I think the Cloud Foundry community, in its investment with Carifi and in continuing to really understand developers and work closely with them, really understands this concept and sees the potential for continuing to invest in this space.
Chris, if we went back in time, one of the things that people always felt about the Cloud Foundry paths is that it was heavy. There were a lot of components, a lot of virtual machines to install. Basically, you needed a cloud service provider to kind of run it for you. At least for most people, that's how they approached it. Where are we now? Are we going to see more people deploying the paths themselves, or is it always going to be consumed as a service, or just, what are the resources required, and can mere mortals approach this thing now?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Cloud Foundry certainly has traditionally been a very opinionated, heavyweight platform, right? And that provided a lot of value, right? It did almost everything you might want it to do for application developers and for operators. However, that made it a little more challenging to be interoperable with new technologies. There's pros and cons to kind of trying to do everything. Certainly, then Kubernetes kind of upended the entire ecosystem, and so there's been a few efforts to make Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes play nice together. And the latest one, Carifi, is a much lighter weight implementation of the Cloud Foundry CLI and API. And it's backed entirely by Kubernetes custom resource definitions. So it's fully Kubernetes native. It's still pretty young, but it's actually quite easy to deploy yourself. You can run it on a laptop. It's not nearly as monolithic as the traditional Cloud Foundry infrastructure has been in the past. So having said that, there's still a ton of people using the old Cloud Foundry on VMs, and it still works great and it's production ready, and the current customers are using it even more than they were in the past. So that's not going anywhere either at the same time.
Catherine, everybody I talk to will say that their platform is developer friendly, and they've been rolling out application development platforms on Kubernetes for several years now, but the uptake is still, I think we measured the number of developers that can write applications in Kubernetes in the, maybe let's say 1 million plus, maybe 2 million out of a total pool of, 40 million. I'm just kind of rounded up some numbers. What is the real challenge in building a developer-friendly platform for Kubernetes, and why haven't we not gotten there after all this time just yet?
This question. I think it's true. You hear a lot of people share they've got a developer-friendly platform. And the real sweet spot with a developer-friendly platform is not just the time to value for developers to actually get up and running and understand the ecosystem and sort of limit how much in-depth knowledge they need, but also the collaboration across the company with the security reviews, the application operators, everyone else that's involved in securing applications, and to being able to do that in a collaborative way without a ticket-based system. You think about developer-friendly, it's not just developers that matter in that, it's all of the others that go through that review process to get that app in production and having them on board with it. I think sometimes we stop developer-friendly, we make it easy to get started, but we don't make it easy to get to production.
Chris, Catherine brings up an interesting point, because we have seen people build out these DevOps platforms and they wind up stitching all this stuff together. And I guess my question is, do enterprises really want to do that, or they just want to write code ultimately? And maybe we're trying to get past all that heavy lifting.
Yeah, I mean, Kubernetes is fairly user-friendly to get started with. Having said that, then yes, you have to, if you want a production enterprise-ready platform for your developers, you have to build it yourself right now. If you want it to be Kubernetes native, which obviously a lot of companies are now reinvesting or focusing more on that, and for, I think, good reason. So there's a lot of value in not having to do that, right? Like, and Cloud Foundry still has the same value proposition it's always had, that, that's done for you. You don't have to think about that with the traditional Cloud Foundry and now Carifi. And we're hoping that becomes, a player in the Kubernetes platform world. I know lots of people are trying to solve for this right now, so it's going to be a competitive space. But still, Kubernetes, the kind of day two problems that arise once you get set up with it, for security and tracing and logging and metrics and identity stuff. There's a lot that you have to put into building a platform. And ultimately, you don't want your developers doing that. And you probably want to have a lean operations team that can handle all that themselves and not, so right now we've got all these companies that are kind of doing the same thing and building their own platform. And that's, I think open source is the perfect place for, to come up with a solution that can kind of work for everyone. And so we're trying to do that. Lots of other people are trying to do that too.
Catherine, one of the things you will hear a lot of people focusing on is there's a term cloud native, and at least in my opinion, it seems to be one of the more heavily abused marketing terms these days because everybody's calling their thing cloud native, even if it's just running on VMs. And I guess my question to you is, do you think we're approaching some point where people are starting to really understand that cloud native means something that scales up and down easily, it's microservices based, and do we really appreciate what the term means these days? Because it seems like some of our marketing friends have just gone to town and throwing it at everything that moves, and not quite everything is really cloud native.
The term really sort of evolved. It started off really talking about 12-factor apps and what does it mean to run at scale and run in environments where you can't guarantee 100% uptime. Do you have failover? Do you have redundancy? Are you managing state in your application? That's kind of where it started. It's certainly evolved to the point where we're talking about, does it run on a cloud? And I think that the reason those 12 factors were considered was thinking about these are the best practices to run on a cloud well and to run in environments so that you have resiliency in your application. It's certainly, to your point, I wonder what the new marketing term will be that sort of evolves us to the next, SOA. Back in the day, we've sort of seen a few of these waves. But the intent was, what are the best practices to make your app run well in these uncertain environments and run well regardless of which platform you're running on? That was sort of the intent behind the term, I believe.
Chris, a lot of people initially associated Cloud Foundry heavily with Pivotal, and Pivotal became part of VMware, and that led to Tanzu and all kinds of interesting things that ultimately came together. But I wonder if a lot of people are scratching their heads still wondering, is Cloud Foundry too VMware specific, or are there enough people contributing to this beyond VMware?
Yeah, fair question, and one that has been around for a bit. I mean, we're very lucky to have Pivotal and now VMware, supporting the project as much as it has. There's always been an effort to get more parity within that. And we had some, SUSE, when they purchased Rancher, they went in a different direction. So we've that we haven't moved farther away from that, I wouldn't say. But we still, we've got a lot of SAP is still incredibly invested in the project. IBM is still a player, and lots of other companies are still very involved in the development and in the community. So we're, would I like to see other larger enterprise or software companies getting involved in the community more? Of course, but right now I think we're in a healthy place, and happy for the contributions from everyone. So.
Well, Catherine, you want to pick up on that, but how does one participate in this community? And do I have to be a rock star developer, or can I help out in other ways?
I love this question. I think one of the things that is so fantastic about this community is its open governance and how it operates. It's very transparent on that front. So to get involved, there's a lot of people that will jumpstart and help you. There's a lot of forums where you can ask for help and sort of understand the code more. And it's actually been a really selling point for many of the consumers of Cloud Foundry. So those that are not contributed but using it, really value being able to see and ask questions on the open source side. So in many ways, it may be that the contributors have decreased over time, but we're still seeing some really healthy discussions about what's being produced, even if it's not being contributed directly, from those outside of the contributor community as well. But no, you don't have to be a rock star. Just get involved. The team's super friendly, and there's just a lot of healthy interactions going on. Very, very much in a way they're trying to say that when anyone's working on it, they're working on it with the CFF T-shirt on, not with their company on, and that's kind of the way the community's always run.
Chris, what do you see, or in your experience, when organizations first go down this path? What is it you kind of wish they knew earlier on, or you see them kind of maybe stumble or trip over, or what's your best advice to somebody who's just starting out?
If you could just clarify on what path exactly
Well, if they're on the path of either building apps, using the platform, or implementing the platform.
Oh, just getting into Cloud Foundry?
Yeah.
Well, there's two reference deployments now. There's the classic Cloud Foundry on VMs, and there's Karifi, which is young but has a lot of promise. The documentation is great for both. A lot of new customers will probably be leaning towards a more Kubernetes native environment. So we'd expect new Cloud Foundry users to jump into Karifi. Having said that, all of the traditional Cloud Foundry user base, the end users, are using Cloud Foundry even more than they were a few years ago, and largely on VMs. To get involved in the community more, there's Slack channel and there's mailing lists, and it's we recently had a full overhaul of our technical governance. So we moved away from kind of a more bespoke, pivotal centric, I would say, technical governance model that we had had for some years into a TOC and working group model, which we pulled from Kubernetes and Knative and some other open source communities to kind of put that together. And I think that's made it a lot more welcoming for contributors and for people that want to get involved in the project itself. So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately there's a number of ways to get involved in the community, and right now there are currently 2 ways to deploy Cloud Foundry, and for different users that they'll have different benefits.
All right, great. Catherine, do you think that we will see an explosion of these types of apps because we're finally reaching some level of critical mass, and our enterprise is making this turn? And ultimately, who do you see making the decision as to what platform to employ when in these organizations?
New app development, we're certainly seeing a lot more of the cloud native focus. I think the challenge for some of these larger organizations is they still have a lot of legacy applications, or if they've updated a part of their ecosystem, there's that part of the ecosystem still has to speak to some more of the legacy systems, which does make sort of adoption and broad changes hard. But the real driver, I think, for having a great developer experience are the leaders of developers. So the lines of business in larger companies tend to drive it rather than the IT and platforms. Because it's something that you want your users to love. That sort of sparks the interest in Cloud Foundry and in getting into that CF push experience. And then I think what tends to happen is the IT teams then go, oh, okay, and this is not that easy, not that hard to run. This is how it works to support, and then get engaged on the operations side. But it's typically still seen as a line of business engagement. Really, people that are managing and wanting to develop their apps quickly tend to be the group that seems most interested.
All right. Well, folks, you heard it here first. There's always going to be technical debt to be paid somewhere along the path, but the issue is, how do we live with it going forward while we continue to build some cool new things? Hey, Chris, Catherine, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. Our incredible host brought us some fantastic interviews with experts from all over the tech industry. From DevOps Unbound to The Lab with Brendan O'Leary, we had lots of amazing content today. We'll be back again on Thursday, so please join us for that. Once again, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon. As always, stay strong, tech strong.